Chapter 21, Troll Treasure. When Li Wei noticed the glimmer of light on the ground, he brushed aside the dirt and hurried over. He raised his torch and saw a small pile of coins, some tarnished with age, some newer, scattered among knives, forks, plates, candlesticks, and cups of all sorts of metal. Some pieces were silver, some gold. Li Wei couldn't help smiling. He had come to the right place. He rummaged through the heap and stuffed every valuable piece into his backpack. There were so many different items that his pack quickly began to run out of space. After a moment's thought, he conjured a reverse smelting furnace on the spot and melted the miscellaneous metalware down into raw ingots. When the smoke cleared, he had 5 gold ingots, 11 silver ingots, and a bag of silver coins. His backpack was empty again. By bulk, the haul wasn't enormous, mostly utensils and small objects, but the variety had filled his bag until he refined them. As soon as he finished smelting, a notification popped up. Li Wei opened his crafting table and found new recipes. Metal tableware and chandeliers could now be crafted directly. Pleased with the useful discovery, he packed up neatly, checked his map, and pressed deeper into the forest. Troll Forest. What a treasure trove. The next day, at dusk, a howl came from the other side of a ridge. An ogre woke with a start to find a human staring at it, and then saw a sword sink toward its kidney. The ogre leaped up to retaliate, but halted when it realized it was daylight. Even in this dense forest, the edge of sunlight made it uncomfortable. "Filthy bug," the ogre snarled. It ripped a stone from the ground and hurled it. The rock smashed into a tree trunk with a sound like a cracking bone, leaving a long, jagged wound in the timber. Li Wei felt cold sweat trickle down. Ogres could throw things from afar. If that rock had struck him, it would have done serious damage. He reverted to his tried-and-true tactic: block the entrance, knock his arrows, and kite the ogre. Moving carefully, he drew it out and picked away at it until it finally collapsed, full of hatred, muttering, "Despicable." After collecting his arrows, he stepped over the massive corpse and deeper into the cave, torch in hand. The second time through the tunnels, he moved with confidence. He checked every nook where valuables might hide, and anything too awkward to carry he fed into his reverse smelting furnace. His actions were brisk and efficient. He finished and left the cave clean and empty in short order. Looking at the growing stack of wealth in his pack, he grinned. This troll forest is something else. Gold and silver everywhere. Over the next week, Li Wei pushed deeper. One night, an ogre stumbled out of the undergrowth, clutching a sheep it had killed, sprinting for its den. "Hurry, hurry," it panted, hauling the carcass home, sweating. It feared the so-called wealth-swallowing ghost and wanted to be inside before nightfall. Once it reached its cave, it started a fire and began roasting the lamb, licking its chops as the meat browned and filled the air with the scent of roasting animals. "As long as I get full, that wealth-swallowing ghost won't even land a hit on me," the ogre boasted, then turned when it saw a human standing there. It flashed a cruel grin. "Looks like I'll have an extra meal tonight." "Ha!" A moment later, it was on the ground, clutching its throat, wounded and defeated. Li Wei took a couple of bites of dried jerky to restore his health. In the week since he'd started hunting here, more than a dozen ogres had fallen to him. He hadn't killed all of them from range. Their hides were too thick for arrows. After the first few, his arrows often broke, so he switched to sword, shield, and a set of iron armor and learned to duel them one-on-one. If a fight went south, he could always run or dig a quick pit. He wasn't afraid of taking a loss. At first, their power intimidated him. The blow from an ogre's palm could crack stone, but after taking many hits, he began to learn their patterns. The lessons were paid for in bruises and broken gear, but he trained himself to read the slightest twitch: slap, sweep, smash, or throw. He wasn't a PvP prodigy, but he became a master at PvE, learning how to counter each ogre attack. Not every ogre den held treasure. Li Wei emerged from one cave in disgust. The place was a mess of bones and filth. Most ogre lairs had little wealth. Finding the ones that did felt like opening a blind box. He also noticed ogres were getting harder to find. For an entire day, he'd only come across the one hunting outside its den. Recalling the muttering about the wealth-swallowing ghost, a thought chilled him. Perhaps the ogres had started to whisper about him. He had killed quite a few. "This could get complicated," he muttered, stepping around the ogre's fire pit and its coarse roasting rack. Then he stopped. A skewer in the middle of the grill caught his eye. Dull with patina, but something about it glowed faintly from within. Leeway approached and snatched it up. The crude stick in his hand pulsed with a strange light. It wasn't a stick at all. Filthy elven ink. Chapter 22. The Tunnel. I scrub. Inside the cave, Leeway poured a bucket of water, frowned, and plunged the filth-encrusted blade into the puddle. He battered and rubbed it hard until more than half of the crust flaked away. When all the grime finally fell off, the sword shone back at him like new. The covered in grime tag vanished, replaced by the item ID, Elven Ain't Sword. Attack 9. Oh my god! 2 points higher than a diamond sword, essentially a diamond sword with a built-in sharpness 3. He'd really found a treasure. Anything labeled elven and ancient had to be old. Elves lived so long that human antiques would be modern trinkets to them. This must be from the last elven era or the one before that. Middle-earth smithing was miraculous. Some weapons didn't decay even after millennia. Leeway glanced at the muddy puddle and the empty bucket in his backpack. Forget it. That water was ruined. He slipped the glowing sword into his pack and felt the trip had been worth it. The value of this one blade outweighed any stash of gold. Wait, had it been glowing the whole time? Alarm bells rang in him. He moved to the cave mouth, crouched in the bushes, and peered out. Rustling footsteps approached. An orc nearly ran past him, reporting to an orc mounted on a warg. Leader, I saw firelight in that cave over there. Never mind. That's ogre territory, the leader dismissed. Yes, sir. The orc fell back. The warg snuffled and circled, its red eyes scanning until they fixed on the shadowed bush. Sometimes Leeway really hated wargs. These beasts smelled better than dogs and could climb walls and trees. Counting the passing cavalry by sight, Leeway estimated about 20 warg riders. He turned the treasure sword over in his hands, measuring his chances. If he had diamond armor, he might fight confidently. Without it, iron armor left him vulnerable. Leeway didn't have much combat experience and usually won by trading blows, but when enemies outnumbered him by more than 10, he got uneasy. Should he run? He just found the sword. He couldn't let them take it. Even so, most players wouldn't charge a superior force. When a warg trotted toward him, Leeway slipped away quietly. The warg nosed the bushes and caught the scent. Something passed here? Its rider asked. The warg whined. Then the leader ordered, "Stay alert." Leeway pulled out his shovel and began digging tunnels as the riders kept moving. He followed their tracks for a time, sticking to a likely trail toward the misty mountains. These orcs were heading back to their lair, and they weren't going to make it smoothly. Leeway drew the elven ancient sword, burst out of the shrubbery, and leaped up with a cleaving strike. Thud, the heavy chop landed true. The rearmost rider was cut down in one blow. The warg beneath him didn't survive either. Either the warg's hide was thin or the blade was impossibly sharp. Leeway had sliced off its hindquarters in a single swing. The creature died where it fell. Enemy attack! An orc ahead turned furiously, bellowing as he charged. Leeway blocked with a shield and shoved the attacker back, then bolted. He couldn't run faster than the wargs, though. They closed in quickly. Just when they were about to catch him, Leeway dove into the bushes ahead. A warg followed, and then froze, bewildered. There was no sign of a human. He seemed to have vanished into thin air. Damn it, where did that scum go? The squad leader snarled. The warg sniffed at the ground, finding only the scent of freshly turned earth. Not far away, Leeway had dug himself out of a shallow pit, covered the hole, and squatted in the grass. A scout went to investigate. The only oddity was a neat square of disturbed soil. Someone had dug there recently. Before the scout could draw a conclusion, a flash of white light streaked out. The warg under the scout shrieked and collapsed. Then the scout himself fell, the blade driven through his chest. Damn it, over there! An orc spotted Leeway, but when a group of riders charged, he had vanished again. Leeway dropped into another tunnel entrance with a thump, sealed the hole, and moved toward a new exit. Damn human! The leader cursed, baffled at how such a big opponent kept disappearing. More screams came from the end of the line as riders were cut down in turn. There's more than one enemy, someone shouted. The ambushes were too varied to be the work of a single attacker. A pack of scum, "Come out and fight if you dare," the squad leader barked, but there was no response. Li Wei resurfaced, crouched in the grass, sword ready, waiting for the perfect moment. He slashed. "Found you!" A whoosh of an arrow cut the air. Pain flared in Li Wei's chest as an arrow lodged in him. After so many ambushes, even dim orcs would take precautions. The squad leader laughed aloud, imagining the feast to come. Li Wei calmly finished off the orc in front of him, pulled the arrow from his chest, stuffed it into his backpack, and said, "Thank you." Then, acting as if unhurt, he ran. Mid-stride, Li Wei tumbled and leaped into the bushes. The squad leader's unease deepened when, after leading his force into the thicket, he found nothing but level ground. The repeated disappearances were too strange. Traps lay everywhere, and staying would mean losing his men. He decided to withdraw. Fall back. An arrow stabbed in without warning, piercing armor and embedding into the leader's shoulder. The shaft came from directly beneath his feet. He peered down into a suddenly revealed 1-meter-wide tunnel entrance, and at last, everything clicked into place. Chapter 23, Pursuit. A critically wounded monster. How can I resist finishing him off? Li Wei saw the arrow strike the orc squad leader cleanly, leaving him with barely a thread of life. He was within kill range. Without hesitation, Li Wei climbed out of the tunnel. Before the surrounding orcs could react, he drew his sword and cut down the squad leader, emptying his health bar. With their leader dead, the orcs around them fell into instant disarray, and even the wargs looked uncertain. Li Wei seized the moment, stepping forward and cleaving through several wargs and orcs. The smell of blood thickened in the night air. One orc rallied and pointed at Li Wei, screaming, "Kill him! He's only one man!" Clang! A sword arc flashed. The warg under that orc had all its limbs severed and collapsed. With an upward slash, the orc himself died instantly. The would-be commander who had stepped forward was killed in a heartbeat, and the squad dissolved into chaos. Some orcs still surged at Li Wei, trying to take him down first, but he needed only 2 slashes to fell one. A third stroke was never necessary. Without a unified command, the scene was pandemonium. Orcs and wargs swarmed and howled around Li Wei, but they never formed an effective formation. They died in small, scattered groups, like panicked children trying to save a parent. Those fighting in the center clashed with him, while those on the edges crowded and screamed, inadvertently blocking the retreat paths of their comrades. Any orc trying to shout orders to restore cohesion was quickly singled out by Li Wei. Even if it cost him some damage, he prioritized cutting down leaders. At that moment, Li Wei grasped the difference a commander made. When the squad leader had been alive, he could only ambush, strike, and run, hesitate for a second, and he'd be surrounded. Now, he could break out whenever he wanted. The contrast was stark. No wonder the orc ranks collapsed so quickly when Azog fell in the Battle of the 5 Armies. Soldiers without formation fight like headless flies, dangerous when organized, but easily dominated when leaderless. Blood stained his clothing, but his sword stayed bright, like an unextinguishable star. That light became the last thing many wargs and orcs saw. When more than half the cavalry lay dead, Li Wei considered breaking away. Their numbers were overwhelming. Even a chaotic charge could wear him down in time. His health was down by half, and his satiety was low. Then something unexpected happened. The orcs began to lose heart first. Half their squad lay dead, yet the human in their midst looked vigorous and unwearied. His wounds seemed to close. He appeared unkillable. That kind of invincibility, when effort yields no visible progress, is often more terrifying than any display of strength. Although Li Wei was truly in danger, he acted as if every attack was ineffective. Swords would glance off, and he would draw them out in counter, cleaving down the would-be attacker. Once or twice, this could be shrugged off, but after seeing it repeated 3 or 4 times, many orcs were paralyzed by fear. Li Wei kept up the act. He raised his longsword and roared to intimidate the survivors while secretly gnawing on dried beef jerky to restore satiety. Once his hunger was sated and his health climbed back, he charged and cut them down for real. "I'm waiting for health regen. What are you waiting for?" he snorted. By the time the fighting ended, more than 20 warg riders and orcs lay in the grass, over 40 bodies strewn like a slaughtered pack. The glow on his longsword faded. The battle was done. Almost at once, a cascade of system notifications blinked in his mind. Rivendell faction reputation reached 100. Dunedain faction reputation reached 100. Obtained faction achievement, friend of Rivendell. Obtained faction achievement, friend of the Dune Way. Opened the descriptions. Reputation above 10 meant the faction recognized him and would treat him more favorably. Reputation at 100 meant he was an undisputed friend. He hadn't even reached Rivendell yet and was already their friend. He checked the reputation log. The deaths of ogres, orcs, and wargs, all enemies of the Free Peoples, translated into reputation gains with those factions. As word spread, reputation with other Free Peoples would rise too, though more slowly. He wiped his blade, took another bite of jerky, and looked at the sky. It was early evening. Li Wei decided to keep hunting for ogres a little longer. Finding ogres required skill and luck. He searched caves, crossed ridges, and ran through the night, but he never found another. By dawn, he'd scoured several caverns and covered a lot of ground, but the 3 ogres rumored to hoard treasure remained elusive. He had gathered a decent amount of gold and a spare sword, so he called it a day and turned toward Rivendell. It was a pity to miss those treasures, but fate had spared them this time. Back at the last bridge, he checked on his horse. The animal was safe and sound, nibbling grass with wise, untroubled eyes. "You've been cooped up long enough," Li Wei murmured, patting its neck. He swung into the saddle and rode east. He rode through the day and into the next evening, consulting his map as he rode. At their pace, he estimated they would reach Rivendell by morning. Falodon had mentioned a small path that led directly into the valley, if he could find it. Without warning, a rush of air sliced past. The horse reared, nearly unseating him, and Li Wei felt a sting in its flank. An arrow had lodged in the beast's side. The armor had taken much of the blow, but the horse bled, 7 drops by the feel of it. Then Li Wei noticed movement. A belt of dark shapes massing along the plain, red eyes gleaming under the starlight. An orc cavalry squad had lurked in ambush, at least 100 strong. "Hell," Li Wei swore. He turned his mount and bolted. "That's him," an orc rider reported, voice tight. "He wiped out our squad in the ogre forest." "Good. The king wants his head," their leader growled. A pack of armored warg riders plunged forward in pursuit, disciplined and relentless. Li Wei's heart hammered. 100 warg riders were more than he could face in open combat. He cursed and urged the horse to run harder. They rode like that for nearly half the night, Li Wei glancing back again and again. The pursuers kept coming. "Do these wargs never tire?" he muttered. There were options. He could keep running until the enemy tired, could dismount and dig a tunnel with his pickaxe. 3 blocks deep might buy him time if he worked fast, or he could try to lose them in terrain. The pickaxe could clear 3 blocks before the riders closed. He hesitated, weighing the chances, when the ground ahead trembled faintly. Li Wei looked up and saw a neat line of silver-gray cavalry appear at the far edge of the plain, their armor catching a pale light under the stars. Were they friend or foe? A long, clear horn call echoed from afar. They once rode beneath the stars. Li Wei found himself thinking for no reason. Rumble. Hooves thundered. A silver-gray tide of riders, clad in white and silver, surged forward. Li Wei felt like driftwood caught in a river, splitting the flow in 2 as they passed, then watched the 2 streams close and sweep on unhindered. Every eye among the soldiers was fixed on the foe ahead. No one spared a glance for the unfamiliar human. In a heartbeat, the silver tide burst into the orc cavalry. Wargs at the front faltered. Orcs were trampled or cut down with single, precise strokes. The charge shattered the pursuit. The orcs could not reform and were forced to stand and fight where they were. The elves rearranged themselves in an instant and began to hunt with ruthless efficiency. An arrow thudded into an orc attempting to flee. Mounted archers fired without missing. Li Wei, who had never tried riding archery, watched in awe. If he tried that, his arrows would likely sail into the sky. Bows, spears, blades, each weapon was handled with consummate skill. Orc numbers dwindled swiftly. There were no boisterous battle cries, only the sound of steel on armor and the dying shrieks of the fallen. The whole scene felt unreal to Li Wei. He stayed on his horse upon a hill, watching that quiet, utter rout. The word routed fit perfectly. The orc chieftain, realizing his line could not break the elves, roared and pulled back with his remaining followers. After picking off a few stragglers, the elves did not pursue far. They instead began to clear the field. Moments later, as if suddenly noticing him, the cavalry swung around and pressed close, surrounding Li Wei on several sides. "What is?" Li Wei tightened in his saddle. A tall elf rode forward. "Outsider, greetings. What is your name?" the elf asked. "Li Wei, an adventurer from a human town to the west." "And what brings an adventurer to this land?" "I heard Rivendell is the most beautiful place in the Westlands, and I wanted to see it for myself." The elf studied him for a moment, then said, "Then I ask you to come with us." The journey onward was silent. Li Wei fell in step with the column, following their steady pace. After the initial greeting, no one spoke to him. The elves around him were so quiet, he had nothing to do but open his inventory and reorganize his pack to pass the time. Though Rivendell's stance toward him showed as friendly in his faction list, the hush of the company kept him a little uneasy. On the one hand, it showed strict discipline. On the other, there was nothing for him to say. He rode in silence until they entered a narrow valley. At first, the gorge seemed dim between tall, shadowed cliffs, but soon the walls opened. Li Wei urged his horse forward 2 paces, and under the starlight his pupils widened. The sight beyond stole his breath. The human eye could only take in so much at once. The scene was too marvelous to grasp at a glance. "A formal welcome, adventurer Li Wei." The tall elf dismounted with a fluid motion and fixed him with a steady look. "We have heard of a powerful human wizard in the wilds of Eriador, one who raised a castle overnight and killed an orc squad of hundreds by himself. He calls himself an adventurer." The elf removed his helmet, and Li Wei stared. The features, the silver circlet, no mistaking it. "Lord Elrond," he breathed. At that moment, an elf in simple clothes descended nearby. "Lindir," the elf called. Elrond inclined his head and handed his sword to the newcomer. Now Li Wei understood the familiarity. This was Elrond, Lord of Rivendell. The one beside him was Lindir. After arranging his men and horses, Elrond spoke to Li Wei again. "For days the orcs here have been unusually active, from the last bridge to the Loudwater. This is not normal. Something or someone must be drawing them." Li Wei felt his face heat. "It might be because of me. I've killed quite a few orcs recently. The Orc King might have marked me." Elrond studied him with an expression that held a touch of admiration. "The evil you have struck down extends beyond mere orcs, I think." Li Wei's eyelids twitched, as if his ledger of deeds had been glanced over. "It's not as exaggerated as the rumors," he said. "There is no need for false modesty," Elrond replied. "Such things should be praised. Rivendell welcomes you, Li Wei. Prepare a feast. Let us welcome our friend." To be invited by the Lord himself was flattering, though Li Wei kept his composure. Later, after Elrond had set aside his armor, they sat in the place of honor at the table. Dishes were set on delicate plates, and an elf poured Li Wei a glass of mellow wine. "Thank you," Li Wei said, taking it. "Elrond told me we first heard of you from the Dunedain," Li Wei said between sips. "A ranger helped me recently. I promised him and his people they could call on me if ever needed." "Elves say generous folk always receive their rewards," Elrond replied, nodding faintly. His gaze drifted to the sword at Li Wei's waist. "May I see it?" "Of course." Li Wei had left the sword at his belt, hoping the learned lord might identify it. Elrond took the blade into his hands, running his fingers along the fuller. "Its workmanship is fine, old, perhaps wrought in the First Age for war against orcs. It is keen. Surely it had a name once." Li Wei swallowed a grin. "I took it from an ogre. Their caves tend to hold old things." He omitted that the ogre had used the sword as a roasting spit. Elrond smiled and returned the sword. "I think it will serve you well against the orcs. I look forward to the day it earns a true name. Only swords that perform great deeds receive names." Elrond's words carried that wish without fanfare. The easy conversation and the Lord's unobtrusive praise put Li Wei at ease. Everything felt utterly natural beneath the starlit fall of Rivendell. Chapter 25. New Module, Alloy. The simple meal ended quickly. Although the Elf Lord held a high position, he was surprisingly approachable. Li Wei had not expected to be received personally. Perhaps Rivendell had not seen human visitors for a long time, or perhaps Elrond, with his great power, had somehow sensed Li Wei's title and grown curious. In any case, it felt like a brief, insignificant interruption in an elf's long life. After a short conversation and a polite indication that Leeway was free to look around, Elrond left. That evening, Lindir arranged lodging for him. Leeway lay on the elegant bed, overwhelmed by the comfort and thinking, elven craftsmanship really is something. This is the best bed I've ever slept in. The night passed quickly. Early the next morning, Leeway stepped outside and immediately felt many curious gazes. Several elves were watching him intently. Word of his arrival and his actions had clearly spread. When he met their looks, he returned them without flinching. It had to be said, elves have many natural advantages. Their long lives give them time to master numerous skills. With centuries to practice, they can become true all-rounders. They were also uniformly handsome or beautiful. Also, the elves' maximum health is 30 points. Greetings, traveler from afar. Any news from the human towns to the west? An elf finally asked, unable to keep his curiosity in check. As always, people live their lives. Nothing major to report, Leeway answered. I heard you defeated a cavalry unit by yourself. Is that true? Something like that. So it's true? Do you practice magic? Something like that, though beating that small unit involved more trickery and luck than anything else. And cheats, someone muttered. Remarkable, the elf said with genuine admiration. A new star of humanity is rising. Will you be staying here for a while? He asked. If possible, I'd be delighted, Leeway replied. And if you don't mind, I could show you around our lands. It's beautiful and safe. No evil lurks here. That would be a pleasure, the elf said. A guide appeared. I haven't asked your name, he said. Agra. Leeway. Mountains, streams, forests, waterfalls, grand halls, small inns, farms and pastures. Both natural scenery and careful craftsmanship seemed to be everywhere. Rivendell by day was even more beautiful than Leeway had imagined. He couldn't help but exclaim, It's incredible. I've never seen anything like this. After seeing this place, I don't even want to go home. Agra smiled proudly. As they passed a building, the rhythmic ringing of hammer on metal caught Leeway's attention. That's the blacksmiths, Agra explained. Last night's fighting left some weapons and armor in need of repair. Our smiths are fixing them now. Elven equipment? Leeway's interest piqued. May I have a look? Of course, you're Lord Elrond's guest. Clang. Inside the smithy, an elf was hammering at a freshly forged longsword. He stopped and greeted them when he saw visitors. This is Lord Elrond's guest, Leeway. He's interested in our work. Greetings, Leeway said. I see you're forging a longsword. May I? Please. Leeway picked up the shining blade from the bench. Elven steel, attack +7. He felt a jolt of surprise. Are all your swords this good? Yes, the smith replied. Is that a problem? No, of course not. Your work is exquisite. Outwardly calm, Leeway was inwardly stunned. Their ordinary weapons were diamond tier. What metal did elves use? It felt impossibly hard. The smith continued, explaining the long history of elven forging. The origins of the guild, the craftsmen who had come to Rivendell, the traditions and techniques passed down through generations. The forging bench itself had a presence that spoke of ages. Leeway stroked the bench, admiring its ancient craftsmanship. Suddenly, a system prompt blinked into his mind. Detected special work block, Rivendell forging table, alloy forging module installed, Rivendell faction crafting recipes unlocked. Leeway froze, taking a sharp breath. A new module had appeared. What's wrong? Agra asked, noticing his expression. Nothing, Leeway said hastily. I was just taken aback by how old this bench is. In elven lands, everything can be very old, Agra explained. It may seem strange to humans, but it's normal for us. Leeway nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He opened the forging interface and found a list of items tagged with elven names. Elven steel sword, elven spear, elven series armor. All of them required a material called elven steel. To produce elven steel, the newly unlocked block alloy furnace was needed. You could smelt it by feeding coal, iron, and a small amount of experience into the furnace. Leeway guessed what that experience might represent. Perhaps some form of magic required in the forging. If he just used coal and iron without spending experience, he'd get ordinary steel, better than iron but nowhere near elven steel. Lately, he'd been worried. His fighting had become more intense, and iron armor no longer sufficed. Diamonds were rare, and he had even thought about risking a trip to the Lonely Mountain to see if he could steal some from under the dragon's nose. But now, with the alloy forging module loaded, The future suddenly looked brighter. If he could craft equipment comparable to diamond armor, maybe he wouldn't have to anger the great beast after all. Chapter 26, Departure. Liu Wei had been very interested in Smog, the great dragon, especially the materials that could be taken from its body. He had long had his eye on them and knew he could not let the chance slip by, just not yet. He wasn't afraid of the dragon. At worst, he could dig a hole and play the coward. But if it chased him away, the people living at the foot of the mountain would suffer. He didn't want to cause widespread misery, and he didn't yet have the confidence to face a dragon alone. So he turned his attention elsewhere. The elves were demonstrating their forging techniques, and Liu Wei listened attentively, treating it as another way to broaden his skill set. For elven craftsmen, making a fine set of armor or weapons began with smelting steel, then slowly hammering and shaping it through many delicate, painstaking steps. Liu Wei, by contrast, only needed to throw raw materials into his alloy furnace, spend a bit of experience, and once smelted, he could craft the finished piece directly at the workbench. The operation was simple, mindless, and fast. The elven blacksmith beside him had no idea their core technology had been cracked at a glance. Strictly speaking, Liu Wei didn't actually know the elven techniques. Everything he did was a black box operation. He knew how to use it, not the principles behind it. But that didn't matter, as long as it worked. This trip to Rivendell had already been worthwhile. Liu Wei's mouth twitched with satisfaction. He wanted nothing more than to end his journey and go home to develop his talents. But there were still things to handle here. After leaving the smithy and briefly touring Rivendell, it was already noon. Agla, for some reason taken with Liu Wei the human and wanting to befriend him, invited him home for a meal. "Welcome to my home, Liu Wei," Agla said. Agla had cooked himself. The meal was plainly fresh and generous, with a good amount of meat. Though elven cuisine tended toward lighter fare, they did not abstain from meat entirely. The reason some dwarves found only bland vegetarian dishes when visiting elven houses was often a bit of polite retaliation for previous grievances. Elven meals also generally included a glass of wine. Agla poured Liu Wei a cup and invited him to make himself comfortable. They ate and chatted, quickly clearing their plates. The meal ended with fine wine, and Liu Wei felt his satiety indicator thoroughly replenished. After a moment he asked, "I've heard elves carry a kind of magical travel bread called lembas. I'm curious, what does it look like, and how does it taste?" Agla was surprised but pleased. "Lembas, I always take some on long journeys. If you want, I have a few pieces." He returned a moment later with several square cakes wrapped in golden leaves. Special effect, health recovery, tense. Liu Wei was astonished. This was not the first time an elven creation had amazed him. Holding the lembas, he felt like he had found treasure. This small cake not only provided a health recovery effect, but a single piece could completely refill an entire satiety bar. It was a divine item for travelers and fighters. If he'd had it when he faced the warg cavalry in the Troll Forest, he might even have dared to stand and fight. Good things were scarce, however. Agla had only 3 pieces at home, and seeing how much Liu Wei appreciated them, he gave them all to him. "Lembas won't satisfy hunger in the way bread and meat do," Agla warned. "You'll still crave other food, but its effects are extraordinary. It will help you in tight situations." "Thank you, Agla. Do you sell any more? I'd like to buy some if possible." Agla shook his head. "We don't usually sell lembas. It's made in small quantities. I just happen to have these." Liu Wei wasn't disappointed. Even 3 pieces were valuable. Since he couldn't brew potions yet, each lembas could be a tiny trump card. Rivendell itself felt enchanted. Time ran oddly here, and before he realized it, he'd been staying for a week. Life was peaceful and almost otherworldly, too peaceful. Early the next morning, Liu Wei dressed, saddled his horse, and prepared to leave. Agla sensed it and walked him to the stables. "You're leaving, Liu Wei?" Agla asked. "Time waits for no one," Liu Wei replied. "I have much to do and cannot stay indefinitely. May the wind be at your heels. Thank you." The elf in charge of the horses let out a small sigh of relief when he learned Liu Wei was leaving. The human's mount had been peculiar. Throughout the 7 days Liu Wei had stayed, no matter what they tried, the horse neither ate nor drank. They had worried it would starve, but the horse remained healthy. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they would have thought Li Wei was mistreating the animal. It seemed the horse was simply extraordinary and very resistant to hunger. Before parting, Li Wei said to Agla, "If you ever have the time, please visit the castle between Wind and Cloud Peak and the last bridge. I will entertain you without reservation." Agla had helped him a great deal during this chance meeting and had even given him lembas. Li Wei wanted to repay the kindness when he could. He had thought to bring souvenirs, precious items, but had nothing with him. Giving gold felt inappropriate, so he decided to wait until his next visit. He also had one regret. He had hoped to meet Aragorn. Aragorn's presence in Rivendell was still a secret. He did not appear publicly, and Lord Elrond did not speak of him, so Li Wei could not bring it up. With farewells said, Li Wei rode west. Far from Rivendell, voices echoed through a damp cave. "Damn you, useless lot," a deep roar thundered. "You can't even deal with a single human. What use are you?" On a great stone in the cave's center stood a massive figure, dominating an orc below with sheer presence. This was the Orc King, leader of the orc settlement, and perhaps of all the orcs in the Misty Mountains. He was furious. A human had destroyed a raiding party he had sent from afar, and worse, had recently struck so close to their doorstep that he had lost a cavalry squad. It was an intolerable provocation. "For some reason that human seems to attract attention," the Orc King growled. Word about the man spread fast wherever it reached. "But we encountered elves," the orc stammered. "He lives on elven land now." "Then go somewhere without elves," the Orc King snapped. The intelligence they had gathered made his decision for him. Scouts to the west of the Troll Forest reported that the sturdy fortress where the human had lived stood empty since he left. No smoke for a long time, only the occasional sound of livestock. Orcs who shouted at its gates found no answer. If the man would not face them, they could at least take his home. "Then loot his house," the Orc King ordered. "Set up an ambush inside. I want his head." The orcs below scrambled to carry out his command, eager for revenge. Chapter 27. Fear that night. A sizable squad of orc cavalry slipped out of the Misty Mountains. They bypassed Rivendell, threaded through the Troll Forest, and galloped into a stretch of wild country. Birds scattered and rabbits bolted as the riders thundered past. Li Wei was still in Rivendell. The elven border scouts, hidden in the trees, noted only that another patrol had left the Misty Mountains. Once it plunged into the Troll Forest, its movements were lost to them. Squadrons of orcs came and went from the mountains every year. This was just another patrol, and the elves paid it little mind. They did not appear to be headed for Rivendell. They were taking an odd route, a detour into the wilderness. Still, when they ostentatiously entered open country, other eyes watched. Rangers stationed in the wilds squinted at distant shapes. Their gut told them something unusual might be unfolding. After days of hard travel, the orcs reached a small stronghold set among forests, fields, and a lake. A low stone wall surrounded it. From a distance, the interior was invisible. The orc squad leader tumbled onto a boulder and peered across the landscape. "We're here," he announced. "Into the woods. Build ladders. We strike tonight," he ordered. Inside the walls, the animals cried plaintively. They had no idea what was coming. Only two of the horses, the ones the castle people had bought from Bree, seemed to sense danger, nervously neighing and stamping. No one answered them. The only watchers were a line of quiet iron golems, huge and expressionless, who regarded the commotion with blank faces and the slow precision of machines. That morning, Li Wei had left Rivendell, excited about newly unlocked modules. He was eager to get home and try them out, and rode hard all day. At dusk, the siege ladder slammed into the wall with a thunderous crash and was hauled into place. Orcs poured up the rungs, shouting. The first to reach the parapet found the watchtowers empty. A strange, joyless laugh escaped him. He hopped down and tramped to the gate, found a lever, and pulled. The iron gate creaked, swung open, and the orcs surged in. The gate was narrow, but tall enough for wargs and riders to come through together. It would slow them, but not stop them. Livestock, pigs, chickens, cows, near the yard watched the invaders with dumb curiosity. The first orcs and their wargs caught sight of fresh, fat animals and drooled. Cleavers were raised. They were salivating at the thought of slaughter. Then the ground heaved. A heavy rolling tremor ran through the yard. The vanguard's cleavers were still lifted when an uncanny weight pulled through their bodies. One orc felt his center give way, and suddenly his world tipped upward. He turned to see the warg beneath him soar with him. They flew over the wall and crashed to the ground outside, a broken heap. If you want to know what it feels like to be really disliked, go hit an iron golem, Leeway thought, watching the scene. The single iron golem that had appeared drew every eye. Around it, orcs stared in horror as a comrade was hurled like a rag doll. The squad leader roared, and the orcs lunged. Numbers mattered. They swarmed the construct, blade and fang flashing, and for a while, even the golem could only flail and toss one attacker at a time. Under repeated strikes, a hairline crack appeared in its iron casing. The squad leader relaxed. The losses seemed tolerable. Once that guardian was down, the place would be theirs. Then a deeper rumble answered, louder, from every corner of the courtyard. From gaps in the wall, from behind buildings and niches the orcs hadn't noticed, tall, bulky figures surged in. Iron arms swung, and entire ranks of orcs were smashed aside and flung through the air. Blood rained from the sky. What had been a single skirmish turned into a rout. 20 iron golems joined the fight, and in moments, the 100-strong raiding party fell apart. The attackers were scattered, mauled, and thrown, morale shattered. 2 panicked riders reached the gate at once and fought one another to be first through, trampling and cursing. The little gate that had promised access now became a choked exit. One orc was knocked flat across the threshold and pinned there. Another threw his warg into gear and fled, abandoning his comrade without a backward glance. Chaos reigned. The squad leader inside the yard looked around at the carnage and felt a cold dread. Magic constructs. This was no ordinary defense. He barked orders to rally and counterattack, but the words fell on ears already torn with terror. The raiders were cut to pieces, scattered, or running in blind panic. Realizing the battle was lost, the leader made a hard decision: escape and warn the Orc King. He shoved through the writhing mass toward the gate, but it was clogged. Move, you useless fools," he snarled, whipping his warg forward and knocking bodies aside. Screams filled the air. At the threshold, he finally saw why the exit was blocked. One of his own lay sprawled across the doorway, crushed and dying. There was no time. He abandoned his warg in a fury, leapt down, and squeezed through the narrow gap. Under the hateful, blinking eyes of his dying mount, the squad leader became one of only 2 survivors to flee that night. He would carry back the news and the fear of what they had found. Li Wei was riding his horse, oblivious to the slaughter, as he rode through the dark. Then a cascade of notifications popped up above his head. Dunedain reputation, Rivendell faction reputation 50, Bree region reputation 30. Your reputation is spreading among the free factions. Li Wei blinked at the sudden surge of messages. What the? More messages scrolled in, less like system alerts and more like chat room feed. Thanks to Destroyer War Famine Plague, Fear Death for 5,000 points. Thanks to Four-Eyed Oolong Panda for 1 monthly ticket. Thanks to reader 222110110346670 for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Set Nickname 11 for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to 10-Year Book Club for 1 monthly ticket. Thanks to reader 29043-0957075 for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to reader 152081821038758 for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Eat and Change Right for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Divine Sticky Wine Drunkard for 2 monthly tickets. Thank you for your support. Chapter 28, New Equipment. The direct distance from Rivendell to Li Wei's castle was roughly 50 leagues, about 240 kilometers. Riding at full tilt without stopping, the trip didn't take long. He left Rivendell in the morning and reached the outskirts of his castle before nightfall on the second day. In theory, if he could travel in a straight line without interference, he could have made it in a single day. In practice, his route curved constantly, and there were always obstacles: fallen trees, rocks in the path, potholes, and the occasional band of orcs. All of that slowed him down. "If only I had a full-speed horse," he muttered. In the game, a horse's top speed was 20 meters per second. If he had one of those, he could go to Rivendell for breakfast and be back by dinner. The horse he rode now was slower, but he wasn't worried. Eventually, full-speed horses would appear. Even without speed potions, breeding could produce faster foals if the right genes were selected over generations. The clop of hooves faded as he arrived at the gate. Something was wrong before he even rode inside. There was an odd, bloody, putrid smell in the air. The little iron gate beside the main gate hung open. Li Wei's heart tightened. He dismounted, kicked aside a corpse, and stepped through. The courtyard was a macabre scene. Corpses littered the ground, orcs and wargs, more than 200 if rough counting was to be believed. Some had been flung up into the watchtowers and were dangling from the top of the walls, clearly tossed there by iron golems. A chill ran down his spine. He hurried to check the ranch first. Thankfully, the animals were intact. "You really have a death wish, don't you?" he muttered. He opened the reputation interface. Misty Mountains Orc Reputation, 9 of 344, sworn enemy. That explained the attack. A handful of iron golems stumped past, bodies streaked with cracks. His side had taken losses too. Li Wei picked a few iron ingots and a small red flower from the ground and planted the flower by the gate. Even the strongest iron golems had health bars. 20 golems facing 100 cavalry was a staggering fight, but the orcs had no real discipline or commanders. A single golem charge would have shattered their formations. He set to work. He decomposed the warg carcasses into bones for fertilizer, dragged the orc corpses outside for a mass burning, and scrubbed the stone yard until the blood and stench were gone. He used some iron to repair the damaged golems and checked on the native animals, especially the 2 horses. They were fine. He'd left plenty of food and water before he left. The castle had always felt a bit cramped. Previous expansions had been converted into farms and pastures, and there was nowhere left for the industrial facilities he wanted. He needed more space. He emptied his backpack into storage, hauled out building materials, and set to work dismantling and rebuilding the wall, extending the perimeter outward. The expansion took over a week and ate through the cobblestone he'd been stockpiling for months. He doubled the wall's length and raised it by several meters, increasing the territory several times over and leaving a large open area inside. The project emptied the big chests in his warehouse. He even had to leave the newest sections of wall thinner for the moment, planning to reinforce them once he could mine more stone. By any measure, it was big, perhaps large enough to be a town. Walls over 20 meters high and thick, stretching for hundreds of meters, would have astonished an ordinary 100-man squad. Now nearly half the flat plain was enclosed, with room for one more major expansion before he'd have to terraform the surrounding land. Once the expansion was done, he earmarked a new industrial zone. Furnaces, blast furnaces, alloy furnaces, anvils, crafting tables. The space looked empty now because so little could be built yet. What he really wanted was a big scorched brick furnace. The newly unlocked alloy casting module piqued his interest, though it made him a little wistful. Tinker's construct, in his experience, was still the best for advanced smelting. Perhaps some condition hadn't been met. Without delay, he fed iron and coal into the alloy furnace. Particles of experience drifted from his body into the furnace, and before long, blocks of elven steel emerged. He could now make elven equipment. He crafted a suit of elven steel armor and put it on. It offered a full extra armor bar compared to iron, though it still trailed a diamond set. For a material made only from iron and coal, it was excellent value. The cut resembled standard iron armor more than the elves' military issue. On close inspection, there were subtle details and a silvery gray sheen that set it apart. Weapons weren't worth replacing. Nothing beat his +9 attack sword, but tools could be upgraded. Elven steel tools had slightly higher durability and mined a touch faster than iron. If only they could be enchanted. That thought bothered him. Enchantment required an enormous list of ingredients: diamonds, obsidian, blaze rods, an alchemy table. The materials for a basic enchanting table were attainable, but blaze rods for the alchemy table posed a real problem unless he could get to the nether. Connected dimensions might be allowed. He made a mental note that when the chance came, he would try to find a way. He stood in the new industrial area, surveying the furnaces, anvils, and empty spaces, the repaired golems patrolling the walls, and the freshly planted flower at the gate. The territory was safer and stronger than before, and his capabilities had just improved. It wasn't everything he wanted yet. but it was a solid start. Chapter 29, Resource Accumulation, ready to go. Li Wei had been thinking about what raw materials the alchemy table would need. Blazes were fire creatures, and balrogs were fire as well. Maybe materials dropped by balrogs could be used. Obsidian, diamonds, lava, balrog. Where could he find all of that at once? The dwarves. Dwarven territories were built into mountains and always had abundant minerals and superb smelting and forging techniques. Even if there was no natural lava, their equipment could melt things down. Diamonds would be easy. Dwarves had been digging for years. As for the balrog, Moria was crawling with orcs and the balrog lurked within. Li Wei didn't want to provoke that now. He had some ideas. Endless water, traps, TNT, kiting with a bow. But what if none of them worked? He didn't have enough contingency plans. Then smog came to mind. A dragon that breathes fire. Would materials from smog be fireproof? Li Wei grew more interested. Balrog, dragon, everything pointed to one thing: the dwarves. He decided he would have to visit dwarven lands. Opening his map, he targeted the Blue Mountains. The Iron Hills were too far, the Lonely Mountain had a dragon, and Moria was full of orcs. The Blue Mountains were best. If he remembered correctly, Thorin and Durin's folk lived there, perfect for a visit. If he could learn dwarven crafting, unlocking dwarf item recipes would be invaluable. Their forging was famous across Middle-earth. But that could wait. Li Wei was still busy developing his territory. Lately, his days were full. Frantic mining by day, half iron, half stone, hauling back full backpacks, stashing ores, then going out again. Evenings were for batch smelting and repairing the hastily built city walls. While repairing, he checked on animals, fed them, and harvested crops whenever the farm was ready. The constant work and the visible growth of resources was addictive. Once the walls were fixed and the warehouse filled again, Li Wei built a blacksmith shop in the industrial district and moved anvils and crafting tables into it, the first building in his territory besides the grand castle. Wandering the grounds afterward, he looked out toward the blasted forest where he had wiped out that orc squad. The area was still full of craters and jagged terrain. It bothered him, so he flattened the ground with dirt and stone. He'd already dismantled the ridiculous sky-high stone pillars. That eyesore was gone. Flattening the ground reminded him of water landings, something he'd never tried. He returned to the territory, built a high platform in a small pool below, dragged up a wild boar, and kicked it off. The boar squealed, splashed, and immediately got up and ran, unharmed. Water landing worked. Li Wei spread his arms and jumped. The air rushed past him, his clothes flapped, and he hit the water without so much as a scratch. He felt exhilarated. From then on, he practiced water landings, dumping a bucket of water at the moment of impact to prevent fall damage. Half a month flew by. Whoa, 14 speed! That day he fed golden carrots to his two fastest horses as usual. By luck, the two with top speeds of 13.5 ms per second produced a foal with a max speed of 14 ms per second. Crossing that threshold meant the horse could finally be considered good. Movement speed had reached a new milestone. The ranch was thriving, no longer just a few big cattle and a handful of pigs. There were chickens, cows, pigs, and nearly a chest full of meat. Still, something felt missing: sheep. Wool was only useful for carpets and beds, but out of habit, Li Wei decided to bring back 2 sheep on his next trip. The territory was prospering, and there wasn't much left to build. It was time for a new journey. First, though, Li Wei opened the mineral chest, took out a dozen stacks of iron blocks, and distributed them around the territory. Iron golems began to form, one by one. Soon the territory had over 200 iron golems. They took up positions along the outermost perimeter, on and below the walls. 200 sounded like a lot, but spread across the entire walls, they felt fewer. Each had a fixed patrol area, and usually wouldn't interfere with daily life. They would all converge only if the territory was threatened. With such a force, even an attack by thousands of orcs wouldn't spell disaster. After placing the golems, Li Wei turned his attention to the chicken farm. In short order, he had 2 stacks of feathers, and the farm was half empty, soon refilled with hatched chicks. He also dug through the warehouse and found a stack of flint from mining. The plan was clear: arrows. After his recent battles, he had learned to always keep combat supplies ready. He crafted 4 stacks of arrows, then used 16 gold ingots to make 2 golden apples, another emergency trump card. Eating a golden apple and lembas together would make him incredibly resilient for 10 seconds. He wondered if the elves would like golden apples. Maybe he could bring one as a gift to Agra when he next went to Rivendell. It was a pity he could only make 2 now. Most of his gold had gone to golden carrots for the horses. His reserves were thin. If only there were gold mines. Travel had become second nature. One bright morning, with a pack full of supplies and reserves, Li Wei saddled his fastest horse, put on horse armor, and set off on his next long journey, westward to the Blue Mountains. Thanks to Bookfriend 1701121067945 for a monthly ticket. Thanks to Bookfriend 2020122713735531 for a monthly ticket. Thanks to the Sow in your backyard for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Schwanling Zero for a monthly ticket. Thanks to Conscientious Warden for a monthly ticket. Thanks to Bookfriend 2221Leno12134670 for a monthly ticket. Thanks to Spring That Passes with a Smile for a monthly ticket. Thanks to Bookfriend 2020-00308-1855436 for a monthly ticket. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 30. A Visit. Li Wei felt the difference the moment he mounted the 14-speed mount. The world on either side of the road slipped away noticeably faster. The wind against his face bit a little harder. His senses sharpened. He found himself craving a full tilt run from a true fast horse. He checked his map as he rode. First stop, Bree. The distance from Roadside Fort to Bree was about the same as to Rivendell, and the road was even better. With this fine mount, he expected to make it before dark. He rode on. While it was still light, he came to a small, familiar roadside gathering, an inn not far from the road, the Forgotten Inn. Li Wei paused, then dismounted and went inside. The inn looked a little old. Only a few people sat at 2 or 3 tables, eating. Li Wei spotted a familiar figure and took a seat opposite him. The man was gnawing on coarse bread with a cup of water nearby. He looked up, sharp eyes under a hood fixed on the stranger who had just sat down. Li Wei? Falodin put down his bread and drank. Why are you here? Do you need me for something? He hadn't forgotten the silver coin he had given Li Wei, the promise that if Li Wei needed anything, he could find him at the Forgotten Inn. Today's coincidence was uncanny. They'd met without trying. Nothing much. I just had a hunch you might be here, so I came to say hello. You back from Rivendell? I've been back for a while. In fact, I'm already on my 2nd long journey. I thought you left less than a month ago. I've been back for half a month. Falodon fell silent for a beat. That was a fast turnaround. My kin told me a fortnight ago that an orc cavalry was marching west along the wilderness edge, this way. 100 cavalry or more. I thought maybe they were after you. Falodon's expression grew serious. 100-man cavalry was no trivial force. I was just about to head to Roadside Fort to tell you. Li Wei smiled and leaned back. Your information's a little late, Falodon. That unit's already been wiped out. He didn't mention the Iron Golem. He counted that as his own work. Falodon was quiet for a moment. I haven't been around here much, so my reports may be behind, but I'm glad you're all right. Where are you off to this time? The Blue Mountains. You just left the Elves' Grey lands, and now you're going to the Dwarves? I have business there. You never stop moving. The two shared a small laugh. After the brief catch-up, there wasn't much more to say. Falodon finished his bread and stood. Let me see you off. Li Wei noticed his movements were a bit stiff as he rose. May you walk with the wind, Falodon offered outside the inn. Li Wei hesitated, keeping his gaze on the wanderer. Falodon shifted uneasily. What's the matter? Are you hurt? Li Wei asked suddenly. How did you? I get scraped in fights. Nothing a rest won't fix. Li Wei didn't look convinced. He watched Falodon's health bar, 1225. It was remarkable the wanderer was still standing. He'd lost nearly half his life. As they spoke, another drop of blood slipped from Falodon. Li Wei sighed and produced a golden apple that shimmered with a warm luster. He pressed it into Falodon's hand. Take this. It's full of vitality. It'll help. This is too valuable, Falodon protested. The apple looked as if it were cast from gold. Whether edible or not, it was clearly priceless. Enough talk. Take it. I won't have you die in front of me. Li Wei's tone was firm. Falodon felt the forced composure he'd been holding snap. the sharp edge of his vigil relaxed. Eat. Li Wei watched him. The weary wanderer hesitated, then bit gently into the apple. Sweet juice burst in his mouth. The instant the pulp slid down his throat, his eyes widened. From head to toe, his body seemed to brighten, cuts and poisoned wounds knit together with incredible speed. A golden glow lifted from his skin, like an extra layer of protection. When he finished the apple, his health read, "'Tis how 5. "This is priceless," Falutin breathed. "You've saved my life. If there's anything you need, tell me." Li Wei thought for a moment. Wanderers moved the wilderness and knew many things. "Do you know of any gold mines?" "As far as I know, there are some in the dwarves' halls and within the human kingdoms to the south, Gondor, for instance." "No, not those with owners. I mean unclaimed gold deposits, or ones held by orcs, or even in Mordor, places without lawful owners." "You know what I'm getting at?" Falutin frowned in thought. "I think I've heard of such places. I can try to confirm. Give me some time." "No rush. I'll wait." Falutin nodded, taking the request seriously. They parted, and Li Wei continued west. He rode through Bree and past the Barrow Downs, arriving near the ancient tomb by night. Li Wei stopped and made some noise and light on purpose, but he couldn't attract any wights this time and had to give up. The next day, Li Wei rode into the Shire along the main road. He didn't stop until noon, when he pulled up at a hobbit hole and dismounted. He knocked gently. Just a moment. Let me get this steak out of the pan first." A chattering voice came from within and grew closer, stopping at the door. The latch creaked. Bilbo stepped out, blinking at the daylight, then paused and suddenly exclaimed, "Li Wei!" The hospitable hobbit swung the door wide and stepped forward, arms open. "Welcome, welcome. It's wonderful to see you again, Li Wei. It's been, well, months since you were last here. Come in, come in. Let's have lunch together. I've got some good wine. We'll have a taste." Li Wei listened to Bilbo's rapid chatter and felt a warm, familiar déjà vu. Bilbo was living his comfortable life just as before. After all these months, neither Bilbo nor Bag End had changed a bit. The bed he'd stayed in was still neatly folded. "Come in," Bilbo added, peering at him. "You look different. Yes, it's hard to put my finger on, but something about you has changed. You must have had quite an adventure." Li Wei let out a small sigh and stepped inside. "Thanks to user 2220531211548872 for 2 monthly passes. Thanks to Chenon for 2 monthly passes. Thanks to Yingzhang for the Italian canon and 2 monthly passes. Thanks to Yizui Fusheng for 2 monthly passes. Thanks to Meixiang Shiwan Li for 1 monthly pass. Thanks to Kun Lian for 1 monthly pass. Thanks to God Doesn't Like Onions for 1 monthly pass. Thanks to Naruto for 1 monthly pass. Thanks to user 22301111175294 for 2 monthly passes. Thanks to user 2210614095367 for 2 monthly passes. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 31, Blue Mountains Fair Enough. Bilbo had been right. A lot had happened in the past few months. Li Wei alone had personally killed hundreds of orcs. He had gone from a complete novice to a seasoned veteran, able to fight calmly in a variety of situations. He hadn't taken part in any massive battles, but plenty of skirmishes, ambushes, and surprise attacks had sharpened him in ways he hadn't expected. After so many fights, his whole bearing had changed. "You look like you've been somewhere far away. Anything new, Li Wei?" Bilbo asked. "Plenty," Li Wei said, a little wistful. Seeing the expression, Bilbo grinned. This chef was a born storyteller. "If I'd known you were coming, I'd have bought fresh food. For lunch today, we'll eat something different, and after that I'll go to the market." Bilbo was already rifling through the pantry, planning meals for the next few days. Time together was always too short. Li Wei only stayed 1 day. Early the next morning, he saddled up. "You're really leaving already?" Bilbo asked, regret in his voice. "Don't worry, Bilbo. We'll meet again," Li Wei said. Bilbo watched him go, hands on his hips. As Li Wei's figure receded, Bilbo's thoughts drifted to the stories he'd heard. Troll Forest, orcs, Rivendell, elves. All of it stirred a little wanderlust. He shook his head. Adventure was exhausting and insecure compared to Bag End's comforts, and went back inside. Still, he couldn't help glancing out the window toward the horizon. A few days later, Li Wei rode through the woods near the Shuan River, clad in elven steel armor. He threaded his horse between trees, cursing under his breath. "This is ridiculous. Orcs here too?" Behind him came a roar and the pounding of many paws. Wargs. At least a dozen of them chased him, 5 ridden by orcs. He should never have taken the shortcut. He wasn't afraid. He'd survived worse, but his horse was. An archer loosed an arrow from behind. The horse reared and faltered. A warg leapt and bit the horse's hindquarters, their favorite target. "Off!" Liwei snapped, thrusting his sword back. The blade cleaved through a warg's skull. The beast dropped. He fed some wheat to his horse and watched its wounds knit. If it had been an ordinary mount, it would already be dead. The orcs behind them jeered and fired another arrow that skimmed Liwei's head. He hissed. Unwilling to be hassled from behind, he notched an arrow to his bow and fired blind over his shoulder. It missed. The orcs laughed. His horseback archery was worse than a common road archer's, and the taunts only flared his temper. "Laugh all you want. If I weren't on a horse, I'd get down and wipe you all out." He gritted his teeth and kept drawing. If he lacked accuracy, he would rely on volume. If he shot enough arrows, one would land. He had plenty of arrows. Their supply seemed endless to the orcs. Wargs went down one by one, and the rider's confidence faltered. "Where do his arrows even come from?" one muttered. "Trash! If you're brave, get down and fight," an orc shouted. "You asked for it." Liwei rounded a large tree, leapt off his horse with a flash of speed, and shoved several round stones into the track behind him to block pursuit. He backed up, baiting the wargs to jump. They ignored the stony obstruction and charged him. Liwei sliced left and right, cutting 2 wargs down. The wounds they inflicted were small and healed almost as quickly as they appeared. More wargs piled on, biting his waist, tearing at his thighs, trying to clamp down on his head, but the only damage that showed were a few tiny -1 pop-ups. Their bites couldn't keep pace with his regeneration. At best, they left him slimed with foul saliva. "Killing's all there is to it," he muttered, and kept killing. An orc, sure Liwei was finished, surged forward with his cleaver raised. A sword suddenly stabbed through a warg on his shoulder and then slashed into the orc's throat. Liwei shrugged off the slobbering beast and cut down the remaining riders, who fled in disorder. Blue Mountains, Dwarf Faction Reputation Heen, Linden Region Reputation 10. The reputation messages popped up. This little band was wiped out. Liwei glanced at his faction interface and noticed something odd. His Linden reputation had reached 160, though he couldn't recall doing anything there recently. Then he realized Linden and Rivendell were linked on the system, branches of the same lineage, so their standings affected one another. It made sense. He'd also made good impressions in Linden, and the dwarves of the Blue Mountains currently seemed friendly enough. He wouldn't be hauled in for questioning if he went there. He knocked the stones out of the road, remounted, and rode west until he came to the Shuan River. Beyond it lay the Blue Mountains after a short stretch of travel. Swimming a horse across was out of the question, so Liwei took out his workbench and built a rectangular boat on the riverbank. He led his horse onto it, climbed in, set a course, and began to paddle. The little craft barely fit a man and a horse, but 2 oars in his hands sent it gliding across the river, the surface reflecting clouds and sky. The pace wasn't much slower than riding. Before long, they reached the far bank. On solid ground again, Liwei spread out the paper map Bilbo had given him. It wasn't clear who had drawn it or when. The exact location of Thorin's Hall wasn't marked, but the general direction was obvious, southwest. Once he explored the area himself, he could mark Thorin's Hall on his system map and never lose it again. Most of the journey that followed was dull and monotonous. At dusk on the next day, a strip of light at the base of distant mountains caught his eye. He stepped onto a well-kept road that led toward them and finally allowed himself to breathe. He had arrived at the Blue Mountains. Chapter 32, Gulp, Gulp, Gulp. To be honest, the journey had not been easy. Liwei didn't know the main roads, so he had to cut through forests and cross mountains, following landmarks he remembered and pushing straight through the wilderness. It was literally a wild path. In places, the terrain was so rough, his horse barely cleared the jumps. So when he finally found the well-kept road leading to the dwarves' settlement, he felt genuinely moved and urged his mount toward the glow ahead. He only slowed when he reached the tall gate built into the mountain, and then led his horse through on foot. Li Wei stopped in front of the massive entrance and looked up. Dwarves weren't tall, but their architecture was grand and imposing. He had to tip his head far back to take it all in. Even the gate was enormous. This whole mountain must be hollowed out, and the interior space would be vast. "Ha!" Marveling at our craft. "Human?" a voice said from behind him. He turned to see a dwarf by the roadside eyeing him. "You don't look like a traveling merchant. Do you have business here?" the dwarf asked. Li Wei dismounted and bowed slightly to the grizzled stranger. "Greetings. This is my first time in dwarven territory. I've heard your forging is unmatched and wanted to see it for myself." The dwarf's face lit up with pride. "Ha! You've come to the right place. Dwarven smithing is beyond anything out there. Fine armor, razor weapons. If you have silver, you can have them all." He leaned in, inspecting Li Wei. "We don't usually trade with strangers, but you look like you've seen a fight. If it were up to me, I'd sell you the best goods." He was surprisingly friendly. After a bit more chit-chat, seeing Li Wei's unfamiliarity with the place, the dwarf pointed him in the right directions. "If you want the inn, go inside and turn right. If you want to shop, go left. There are blacksmiths and a caravan just returned." "Thank you," Li Wei replied. Wishing the dwarf well, Li Wei led his horse under the great archway into the dwarven hall. Dwarves usually lived and worked inside mountains. Few ventured far outside except for caravans. Since the fall of the Lonely Mountain, this hall had become Thorin's kin's dwelling. Even prepared as he was, Li Wei was awed when he stepped inside. The cavern was far larger than the exterior suggested. Vaulted ceilings that seemed endless, chandeliers hanging from thick iron chains, glowing stones set into the walls. Houses and bridges lined the chasm. Statues and towering walls rose from an underground river up toward the ceiling's rim. The clang of metal echoed throughout, giving the place a constant, lively din. Following the dwarf's directions, Li Wei turned right and spotted a multi-story building with dwarves coming and going. The inn. "Welcome, take a seat anywhere," the rotund innkeeper called as Li Wei entered. "Oh, and you'll need to stable your mount. Move, lad. Find a place for the guest's horse." The innkeeper barked orders at a young dwarf, and soon both Li Wei and his mount were taken care of. Li Wei sat at a table and ordered dwarven specialties, strong liquor and roasted meat. He'd brought plenty of silver, plunder from the ogre's lair, enough to be extravagant for a while. As evening fell, more dwarves came in and the once quiet first floor grew lively. Yet Li Wei, a human among them, drew attention. A human, haven't seen one in ages, rare these days. Doesn't look like a trader, probably just passing through. He's slender. He might be fit, but he has no beard. I wonder where he's from. Li Wei felt that earlier thought, that dwarves were crude and uncouth, slip away. They were noisy, sure, but not rude. Before he could relax, a young dwarf raised a mug and shouted, "Hey, human! Brother over there! Let's have a drink!" Li Wei raised an eyebrow but lifted his own mug. The young dwarf guffawed and downed his ale in one big gulp, belched loudly, wiped foam from his beard, and groaned in delight. Li Wei matched him, finishing his mug without flinching and raising an empty cup in reply. A whistle went up. "Drink him under the table," some shouted. The dwarves loved a show. Li Wei looked pleadingly at the innkeeper, but the innkeeper only egged them on. Not great. "All right then," Li Wei said, slamming the table. "I accept. If you can drink me under the table today, I'll pay for your whole bill," the young dwarf declared. 2 large barrels of wine were brought out. 2 tables were shoved together. Gulp, gulp, gulp. Gulps echoed all around. The dwarf assumed this would be an easy win. Few could outdrink him. Li Wei, however, was amused. Drunkenness acted like a buff for him, and he had several jars of milk in his pack. As for stomach capacity, alcohol increased satiety but didn't stop him from drinking. It only seemed to lengthen the drunk effect. "To our meeting," the dwarf toasted, tilting his head back and draining his mug. "This is the 5th time we've toasted to our meeting," one of his companions laughed. Li Wei kept drinking. The table soon piled up with empty mugs, each holding nearly a pound of liquid. Between them, they'd gone through nearly 20 mugs apiece. The young dwarf's eyes were starting to unfocus. Foam flecked his lips. He pointed a shaky finger at Li Wei. "I'm telling you, you can't. Throw up." Li Wei set his empty mug down casually. Ah, I think I'm starting to feel it. Is this what drunkenness is like? He said softly. His voice was steady, his eyes clear. To the young dwarf, it sounded like a dark whisper. He rolled his eyes and slumped forward onto the table, knocked out cold, wine foam at the corners of his mouth. The winner, the human traveler, the innkeeper announced, standing on a stool and raising Li Wei's arm. Oh! The room erupted. Dwarven reputation in the Blue Mountains area. The ground-based castle has its uses. As for the floating city, that will be mentioned later. Thanks to Dachin Sanshi for 2 monthly passes, Udian Kan for 2 monthly passes, Chenan for 2 monthly passes, Yinglin Jiu for 1 monthly pass, Yishao Ergo de Chun Tian for 1 monthly pass, Kulu Wang Kashu Si for 2 monthly passes, Ikan Shu De A Li Mu for 1 monthly pass, Reader 22311885231632 for 1 monthly pass, Reader 2210-301-10653352411 for 1 monthly pass, Zibing Lang for 1 monthly pass, Mo Lu Guo de Lu Deng Wang for 1 monthly pass, all fellow immortals for 2 monthly passes, Reader 16221222471 for 1 monthly pass, Wobeng Gu Hong for 1 monthly pass, Kunquambe Dao de Fen Nu Tai Lang Wan for a 100 coin reward. Thank you for your support. Chapter 33, Diamonds. That works too? Watching his reputation jump, Li Wei leaned back with a strategic smile. Dwarves really were predictable. Apparently, even drinking could boost one's reputation. It also gave him a new idea. Raising reputation didn't always require killing. As he thought this, his vision began to tilt upward. Oh no, this is the after effect. He checked his status bar. Ah, I should put my luggage upstairs first. Go ahead, sir, but mind your head. It's a bit low here. Thud. There was a collision on the stairs. Sir? I'm fine, Li Wei called, hurrying back to his room. He pulled out the milk and downed it. Phew, the drunk status disappeared instantly. He hadn't forgotten why he'd come, but the interruption had thrown off his rhythm. At least he didn't have to pay for the inn. The young dwarf had promised to cover his expenses. Sober now, Li Wei didn't linger. He headed straight for the market. The market was crowded. As the polite dwarf had said, the caravan had just returned with fresh goods and everyone was shopping. Among all those dwarves, Li Wei stood out, but no one bothered him. His reputation was friendly. Several roadside blacksmiths caught his eye. Fine swords and armor. He paused at a stall and inspected the wares. Dwarven steel sword. Attack 7. Even a sword from a roadside stall was high quality, comparable to a diamond sword. Interested in weapons? You've come to the right place. I only sell good stuff. They are good, Li Wei agreed, but he didn't need them. None were better than his own sword. He looked over the armor, tapping and testing it, then couldn't help glancing around for a crafting recipe unlock. Nothing happened. The blacksmith owner, watching him fidget with the armor, finally spoke. No need to try it on, human. That armor's made for dwarves. You won't fit. I could make you one, but it'll take time. No, thanks. Just looking. Li Wei frowned. He'd unlocked new recipes in Rivendell by seeing the forge, so for dwarven recipes he probably needed to see a dwarven forge. That explained it. He moved on and asked, Do you have any diamonds or obsidian? The blacksmith looked puzzled. Obsidian? What for? No, I don't deal with those. Ask the miners below ground for that. Or go see the jeweler over there. Li Wei thanked him and crossed the busy street to a quieter shop. Obsidian? No, but I do have some diamonds. What do you want? Ring, necklace, bracelet. I want a whole piece. The jeweler scrutinized him. You can't judge a book by its cover. The human lord's clothes looked like fine material, so he couldn't be short of money. How big? This big. Li Wei mimed the size shown on his crafting table, about the size of a fist. He was a little nervous. He wasn't sure he had enough money. The jeweler's eyes widened. Hiss guessed, a diamond that size is rare. If you want a whole stone, it'll be hard, but if you're willing to use small fragments, I can assemble an equivalent volume. Small fragments. Li Wei hesitated, then nodded. That works too. The jeweler disappeared into the back and returned with a pile of tiny chips. See if these work. Diamond dust. A pile of diamond dust can be crafted into a single large diamond. How much? Li Wei asked. The jeweler named a price. Li Wei glanced at the silver in his pack and realized he didn't have enough. I don't have that much. Can I trade other gems? You can, if the gems are worth it, the jeweler said. Li Wei pulled out the small gems he'd pried from the whites. Those remained useful. The jeweler examined them. These are good. I can exchange them for diamonds at 1.25 times their volume. Do you have more? This won't cover everything. I'll make up the rest with silver, Li Wei said, wincing. He'd nearly spent all his savings for 1 diamond, but finally the crafting prompt appeared. Unlocked. Diamonds. On the workbench, a brilliant blue diamond formed. More than half his silver and 3 small gems had purchased a fist-sized diamond, and 1 small fragment remained. He still needed another full diamond, but he couldn't afford it. He remembered the jeweler's words. Whole diamonds this size were rare. Li Wei weighed the heavy, flawless stone in his hand. It was beautiful. After a moment, he went downstairs to find the richest dwarf in the area. At the house, he knocked on the door. The dwarf who opened it was fatter and flashier than the others and worshipped shiny things. Excellent, the dwarf shouted. Give it to me. Take it all. My silver, my gold. I'll give it all for it. Li Wei shook his head. Not gold or silver. I want diamonds. Many diamonds, whole or fragmented. Stay. Don't go. Wait right here. The dwarf bundled his wealth and rushed out, gone for a long time, almost until the next meal. Just as Li Wei started to wonder if he'd ever come back, the dwarf returned, struggling with a small box that rattled. Look, enough? He panted. I can guarantee this is all the diamonds dug and sold around here. You won't find more soon, the dwarf added proudly. Li Wei opened the box. The fragmented diamond dust inside was enough to craft 5 large diamonds. The dwarf had been collecting diligently. That's enough. Here you go. Hobbiton unlocked. Give you diamonds. It was a satisfying trade. Li Wei handed over 1 superior, large diamond and received enough diamond dust to make 5 diamonds of decent quality. The dwarf got his prized, flawless gem. Li Wei walked away with material to produce more, both parties happy. Thanks to Brother Qilong for 2 monthly passes, Great Loser QAQ for 1 monthly pass, Night in the Shadow for 1 monthly pass, Plum Blossom 10,000 Miles for 1 monthly pass, Cicada of Death for 2 monthly passes, Reader 2601755399 for 2 monthly passes, Reader 2221101 21101034670 for 1 monthly pass, Night Without Light Without Dark for 1 monthly pass, Eating Right for 1 monthly pass. Thank you for your support. Chapter 34, Dwarven Technology, Obsidian. That's a way to make money too, Li Wei thought as he turned the 5 diamonds over in his hand. The stones he'd crafted at the workbench were not only large but flawless. No matter their quality before, they became top grade afterward. Gather average diamonds, craft them, and sell them as premium gems. The profit margin was absurd. Of course, you couldn't do it forever. If too many appeared on the market, their value would collapse. He'd probably cleaned out what was available in this area for now. The dwarves surely kept far more reserves than they'd sold him. These were not a poor people, but they never expected a stranger to buy so many raw materials at once rather than finished goods. Obsidian, he muttered. With diamonds sorted, the next problem was another rare material. The dwarves didn't keep any. Obsidian was useless to most of them. So Li Wei needed a different approach. He needed magma. He found the blacksmith who'd given him directions earlier. Do you have magma? I need a bucket. The blacksmith frowned. Magma? What on earth would you want that for? Li Wei shrugged. The idea of taking magma as a souvenir would be absurd, and the blacksmith couldn't make sense of it. I really need it. No. How much is this sword? Li Wei asked, then bought the only sword in the shop. The weapon wasn't cheap, but Li Wei's coin stash wasn't a concern. With his productivity, he could always make more. The blacksmith watched him for a moment, then relented. All right, I have a brother at the smelter. He can help you get some. Relief tightened Li Wei's shoulders. If he couldn't get magma here, he'd considered bringing equipment to dig toward the mantle, though surviving such depths was far from certain. The blacksmith led him deeper into the forge hall, winding through corridors until a vast forging chamber opened up. Hey, old friend, how are you today? The blacksmith called. Not bad. Before a massive furnace in the center, a dwarf wiped sweat from his brow and hammered at a piece of armor. When he finished that section, he came over to greet the blacksmith properly. He glanced at Li Wei. Who have you brought? A guest. He wants a bucket of magma. Help him out if you can." "That I can do, but is magma all you need?" "Yes," Leeway replied, producing a bucket. "Just fill this." "A strange request." The dwarf grunted, but he began to work. The blacksmith returned to his shop, and Leeway let his eyes wander over the hulking equipment in the forge. He felt an urge to touch, curiosity about materials, techniques, anything he could bring back. "If I were you, don't touch anything," the dwarf warned kindly. "You don't want your fingers burned off." Leeway couldn't help himself. He reached out. Immediately, heat seared him. Hiss, whoosh, hot, scorching. Detected special multi-block structure, dwarven furnace array, craft unlocked. The pain faded as a new line of information blinked in his head. He realized what he'd activated: a furnace array, a dwarven multi-block structure capable of smelting special metals and producing liquids, magma included. The dwarf who'd been working beside him snorted. "You're more reckless than the most reckless dwarf I know." They worked the array together, fuel, stones, stoking the fires, until a glowing river of molten rock flowed from a pipe into Leeway's iron bucket. He couldn't help grinning. "That's what I needed." He thanked the smelter, paid a generous fee for the trouble, and stowed the bucket away. Achievement unlocked, piping hot. While the magma was being made, Leeway had taken the chance to inspect the forge. As he walked, more multi-block structures registered to his crafting interface. Unique dwarven technologies, each a clue to more efficient ore processing and unfamiliar forging techniques. These would make future smelting far faster and open the possibility of crafting dwarven weapons and tools. Dwarf arms favored heavy implements, battle axes, throwing axes, warhammers. Leeway guessed the sword had been hard to sell here. These folk preferred blunt force. He also found, to his satisfaction, higher-tier tools. A dwarven steel pickaxe among the unlocked recipes. It wasn't as durable as a true diamond pickaxe, but its hardness was far beyond iron, and crucially, it could mine obsidian. That solved the problem. With obsidian, he could complete the enchanting table and the Hellgate materials he needed. Though his body was still in the Blue Mountains, his mind had already drifted home. He'd already decided where to place those two items. As the lava flowed into his bucket, Leeway felt the basic objectives of this trip fall into place. He returned the smelter's thanks and turned to the dwarf who'd first helped him earlier. "I heard this place is led by Thorin Oakenshield, king of Durin's folk." "Aye," the dwarf said, pleased Leeway knew the name. "It is under his leadership that we've prospered." A shadow moved at the entrance of the hall. The dwarf at Leeway's side glanced back. "He's here." Steady footsteps approached. Leeway turned to see a broad-shouldered dwarf stride into the light, tall by dwarven standards, muscles honed by a smith's work, a face set in a stern, unyielding expression. Even without a title, the presence made conversation hush. Leeway recognized him instantly. Thorin Oakenshield. Those nearby bowed. Thorin nodded once, a small motion that carried weight. He looked at Leeway, a human standing a little more prominent than most visitors, and studied him for a few seconds. Leeway gave a polite, measured bow in return. Thorin inclined his head and then moved to his own forge. Clang! The rhythm of hammer on metal filled the hall as Thorin set about his work. "Swinging a hammer keeps the arms strong," the dwarf near Leeway murmured. "So they'll be ready to swing a weapon when the time comes." Chapter 35. Returned Thorin might leave for the nearby human towns someday, but certainly not yet. For now, he had only one obsession: reclaiming the Lonely Mountain. Since inheriting the title King under the Mountain of During, the urge to take back his homeland had grown and gnawed at him day and night. Still, aside from a certain brooding, Thorin was otherwise himself, all the bearing and skill a king should possess. The evil dragon was far from him. After their brief encounter, there was nothing left to say. Leeway stayed a few more days at the inn, learning dwarven customs, wandering the market, and picking up local specialties. He bought a lot of lapis lazuli, that beautiful blue stone the dwarves produced, mostly used for flooring or wall decoration, not in high demand. He didn't spend too much on it, but enough to bring home a pile. When the last few silver coins in his pouch ran low, he finally prepared to leave the Blue Mountains. "Oh, what a pity. Our drinking king is leaving so soon. You're the best drinker among humans I've ever seen." "What's your name?" the innkeeper called, coming out a few steps to see him off. The innkeeper knew when to be courteous and when to be boisterous, like most dwarves. "Li Wei," he said. "Li Wei, huh? I'll remember that. Welcome back next time, haha. If you're free, we'll have a drink." Next time, who knew when that would be? Li Wei mounted his horse and rode out along the main road. Once he left the dwarves' safe areas, he strapped on his full armor and urged the horse into a hard gallop through mountain passes and pine forests. Clad in silver gray, he cut an intimidating figure. Ordinary bandits or lone orcs would think twice before attacking. Li Wei was no longer the naive adventurer who'd first left the Shire. He had traveled far, seen blood, and he didn't plan on taking chances. In dangerous country, armor made sense. Besides, the set wasn't exactly ugly. The journey was mostly uneventful. A cool breeze hinted that autumn was coming. By the Shuan River, he dismounted, squatted by the bank, and touched the water with a fingertip. "It's getting cold," he murmured. Far away in the Shire, Bilbo had the same thought. He sat inside his cozy hobbit hole with a greatcoat slung over his shoulders, smoking Shire pipeweed as he watched the stars through the window. He had a warm fire, a tidy garden, a lawn, and a little stream outside. What more could a hobbit ask for? He wondered how Li Wei was faring and hoped the road treated him well. Li Wei's tales still echoed in his head. Early the next morning, there was a knock. "Just a moment. Wait, let me flip this fried egg. I didn't expect visitors at this hour," Bilbo called. The door opened, and Li Wei stepped in, carrying that same easy familiarity he always had when visiting. "Li Wei, you're back so soon. Come in, I'm making breakfast. Want to join me?" "Haha, I'll impose then," Li Wei said and fell into the rhythm of the kitchen. Under Bilbo's expectant gaze, he took the spatula and helped cook. After they ate, Bilbo slumped in his chair with a satisfied burp, unable to move. Every time Li Wei came, Bilbo's appetite ran away with him. Li Wei didn't overstay. After breakfast and a late morning snack and lunch, he prepared to leave. Before he went, he left Bilbo a gift. "These are some specialties I brought back from the dwarves in the Blue Mountains. A thank you for always taking care of me." He set a large, heavy sack down with a thud. Bilbo blinked at it. "You're too kind. Really, I only did what any host would." Still, he peered into the sack with curiosity. He pulled out a short dwarven steel sword, drew it in the light, and watched his own somewhat startled face reflected on the blade. The cold glint made the comfortable hobbit feel oddly uneasy. "I don't suppose there's any place for this in my house. Maybe I could use it to chop vegetables?" "Use it how you like," Li Wei shrugged, "but it's a fine piece." Bilbo shook his head and set the sword on a cabinet as if it were an odd ornament. He dug into the sack again and pulled out a round, hard loaf. "What's this?" "Cram," Li Wei said. "Dwarves say the caravans brought it from Dale. It's a local specialty, keeps a long time." Li Wei thought to himself that it was the Centraland's version of a large Russian hard bread. You can store it for ages, eat it slowly. Though he was full, Bilbo took a bite. "It's very dense, a little salty, must have salt kneaded in. Quite a fresh, unique flavor. I like it," he said, nodding. In Bilbo's mind, Li Wei always seemed to be in a hurry, coming and going quickly. Soon he watched the armored man and his horse disappear down the road. Bilbo took another bite of cram and eyed the rest of the sack. Li Wei didn't say how long these can be kept. A long time. How long is that? Li Wei didn't worry about shelf life much. Once something went into his inventory, it lasted as long as he needed. After leaving the Shire, Li Wei lingered in Bree for a short time. He browsed and bought a large stack of books, then bought 2 sheep from nearby farmers and led them home. He didn't care about their sex or fiber. Fed well, they'd breed. When he passed back through the town gate and settled the sheep in his fields, he surveyed his land. Everything looked the same. The crops were ripening, but otherwise nothing had changed. It was time to get to work. After settling the horses and straightening his pack, Li Wei sprinted to the warehouse, grabbed a pile of materials, and rushed to the industrial zone to start assembling equipment. First, he built a dwarven smelting array, almost as big as the nearby blacksmith building, which ate iron and effort alike. Next came several dwarven forging stations of different sizes, including a massive pendulum hammer that needed an overhead support. After thinking it over, Li Wei simply expanded a huge underground forging workshop beneath the industrial area and moved all the dwarf-related machines down there. Now it's just like a dwarf's workshop. Everything was underground. Li Wei hefted a bucket of coal into the smelting array, added stone, and let the fuel blaze. The stones gradually melted into vats of magma, which he poured into water to form obsidian and then dug up with a dwarven steel pickaxe. Raw materials acquired. In a newly unzoned spot, he opened his workbench. Achievement unlocked, Enchanter. A block with an obsidian base, diamonds inlaid at the corners, and a book floating above it appeared on the ground. The enchanting table was complete. As someone approached, the book opened on its own and presented its pages toward Li Wei. When he touched it, strange runes swam across the pages. He could only make out a little, the rest was garbled. The table revealed only one enchantment attribute in advance. Li Wei didn't start enchanting immediately. An enchanting table needed bookshelves to reach full power. Achievement unlocked, Librarian. Rows of 2-meter-high bookshelves rose up around the table. Transparent runes drifted from the shelves and converged on the floating book. Li Wei stared at it and grinned. When Followed-On saw this, he'd have to call him a wizard, and this time there'd be no denying it. Wizard wasn't a bad title. Confident the table was at max power, Li Wei set his ancient elven sword on it. The sword rose and hovered over the table. 3 options appeared in the book. The first 2 were ignored automatically. The third read, Sharpness 4. That meant one enchanted attribute would be Sharpness 4. The rest were uncertain. Li Wei checked his level, 47. More than enough. He fed lapis lazuli into the table. The lapis flashed into light and fused with the sword. The final enchantments materialized. Sharpness 4, Durability 3, Sweeping Edge 3. The sword's attack climbed from 9 to 11.5. Not bad, Li Wei said. On the surface it looked much like the unenchanted blade, but up close a faint ethereal glow shimmered along the edge, adding a touch of the divine. That glow didn't conflict with the sword's light when facing orcs. If anything, it made the weapon feel exceptional. Li Wei found himself unable to put it down. It felt like a blade that could fell an orc in a single strike. Still, Sharpness 4 was a little short of perfect. He pulled out his elven steel armor and started enchanting piece by piece. Protection 4, enchant it. Durability 3, not stable enough, refresh it with an enchanted book. His level dropped steadily. By the time he hit level 29, he had a full set of Protection 4 elven steel armor and an enchanted book with Durability 3. Needing a bit more experience, Li Wei killed a few chickens to top off his level, then enchanted the book again. The book granted Sharpness 4 and Respiration. Luck was on his side. He applied it and created a Sharpness 5 sword with a full 12 attack, stronger than any vanilla weapon. With Protection I full armor and an ancient elven sword superior even to netherite alloy blades, Li Wei figured he could meet that 20-man warg cavalry he'd encountered in Troll Forest head-on this time, no ambush required. Ogres, too, could be taken on without fancy technique. Enemies below a certain size were no longer much of a threat. But his experience was still limited. What other ways to get good enchanted books? Fishing. Fishing could yield treasures and experience. But he needed a fishing rod, and that needed string. He realized, to his surprise, that he'd never obtained string. Did he have to go fight giant man-eating spiders? Those only seemed to appear in the Black Forest or Mordor. Then he remembered a human town in the Bree area where farmers grew flax. Flax, linen. That would work. He left immediately. A day later, he came back with seeds, planted them, and accelerated growth with bone meal. Crop obtained. Linen. Crafting recipe. 1 linen equals 1 string. No need to hunt terrifying spiders. He set up a linen field, used bone meal to speed it along, made a fishing rod, and cast twice. Night fell as he fished. When he checked the chest he'd left by the shore, the haul included a bow, leather, rotten flesh, a bowl, a tripwire hook, sticks, a water bottle, and an enchanted book. Too bad, no good enchantments, he muttered. Still, after a day of fishing, he'd climbed back over level 30. He made a new fishing rod and enchanted it. Luck of the Sea 3, Durability 3. No lure, but Luck of the Sea 3 more than doubled his chances to catch treasure. Not bad, he decided. It was dark. Li Wei went out to the pasture and fed the animals. A few pieces of wool dropped into his pack, his first ever wool. He'd never made a bed before. He didn't need sleep and had always been busy mining and building in his territory. The bed in his room had been 2 planks thrown together. not even a proper blanket. He didn't mind sleeping on a board, but it would be awkward to have guests sleeping on that. Not everyone was a ranger who could sleep anywhere. He made beds for the master bedroom and all the guest rooms. In the master bedroom, he set 3 beds together into one large bed. With a plop, Li Wei flopped onto it. Ah, comfortable. He sank into the soft wool mattress and felt a drowsiness wash over him, a kind of comfort no other bed had given him. It lived up to its workbench origin. It could rival the beds in Rivendell. Li Wei jerked awake, his drowsiness gone in an instant. P.S. Sorry, the bed appeared a bit late. Thanks to Deep Sea Submarine in the Sky for the 500 coin reward. Thanks to 3 years of blood writing for the 100 coin reward. Thanks to Chinan for 1 monthly ticket. Thanks to Passerby A among Passersby for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Reader 2070471236511870 for 1 monthly ticket. Thanks to Open the Door for 1 monthly ticket. Thanks to Reader 2022090723344743 for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Xiaoyao Ziyin for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to There's a Little Monster for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to 3 years of blood writing for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Reader 2222072123048985 for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Midnight Snack Stall for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Secretly Watching You 00 for 1 monthly ticket. Thanks to Reader 2240282149144435 for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Shu Leleleleli for 1 monthly ticket. Thanks to Reader 22066822402227 for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Tang Shiguang for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Disaster's Burial for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Thunder You for a Meal for 1 monthly ticket. Thanks to I Am a Lone Swan for 1 monthly ticket. Thanks to Chasing Dreams, Innocent Heart, Starry Sky Story for 1 monthly ticket. Thanks to Fried Eaten by Books for 2 monthly tickets. Thanks to Reader 2021-0209-2020533489125545 for 2 monthly tickets. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 37. The Netherly Way's heart raced when he actually saw the message. Ever since he arrived in this world and noticed his health bar showed ordinary red hearts instead of hardcore mode hearts, he'd wondered whether he had only 1 life. He'd never had the chance to confirm it. He couldn't risk actually dying. Now the game made it clear. Bed block is only effective within the territory. His territory. He could only revive inside his own borders. No wonder there had been no prompt when he'd slept outside before. This was the catch. If he didn't expand his territory to cover the whole world, he'd be dooming himself. Li Wei stared at the thought for a moment and then shook his head. For now, he would avoid dying at all costs. Still, he set a few chests next to his bed and stocked them with spare equipment and weapons. That night, for the first time in a long while, he slept soundly. At sunrise, he woke refreshed, his mood quietly satisfied, just the psychological reassurance of knowing reviving was possible if needed. Today, he thought, he would go fishing again. He fished through the morning and into the evening. After a full day, he reeled in an enchanted book, Mending. He immediately used it on his elven ancient sword. The blade hardly needed it. The weapon's durability was already astonishingly high. It felt like the work of first-age master smiths. Only something like Sauron's full power might ever threaten it. After a bite to eat, he realized something was still missing from his preparations. The smelting setup, the tools, the enchanting table, everything was ready. What he needed was the nether gate. Li Wei went to his underground workshop to smelt lava. Barrel after barrel of lava turned into obsidian, and with each block, his palms dampened with sweat. The nether was another world. If it truly connected, something there would notice. He couldn't predict how an unknown existence would react, but the conditions were met and he couldn't ignore the chance. 10 obsidian blocks were ready. On the surface, he picked the spot, fenced it off, and built the portal. He placed the final block and pulled out the flint and steel. For a moment, his consciousness froze. The river still flowed. The breeze rustled leaves, horses neighed, sheep bleated, grass swayed, and the stars glittered as if nothing had changed. But above Roadside Fort, the sky felt as if it had collapsed inward. a colossal will pressing down from the heavens and extending from Li Wei to the newly lit gate. It wasn't hostile, it was almost gentle. The pressure he felt was instinctive awe in the presence of something vast. Then deep nether notes rolled in, familiar ambient sounds, and oddly, a sigh. In the blink of an eye, everything returned to normal. Li Wei breathed out. Along with the release came new information in his mind. Creatures in the nether could not cross the portal, and creatures from the central continent couldn't enter it either. This passage was open exclusively to Li Wei. Also, the nether gate could not be built outside the territory, an inherent rule, not the will of whatever had just touched him. He thought about what unrestricted access to the nether would mean. If piglins could be farmed and transported freely, they could overrun the central continent in no time. The idea made him grimace. Still, at least he could go there himself. Li Wei donned his armor, gathered supplies, and stepped through the portal. Achievement unlocked. Into the fire. A weightless sensation washed over him. Heat and crimson filled his vision. He stepped onto the soft netherrack and felt, for the first time, a flicker of familiarity. A wailing rose in the distance, then a large fireball arced toward him. Instinct and battlefield experience sharpened his reflexes. He drew his longsword and met the fireball. The blade struck it, and the fireball flew back along its original path without exploding. Achievement unlocked. Return to sender XP. A ghast hovered in the sky. Having dealt with ambushers and archers on the central continent, Li Wei found these slow-moving fireballs almost trivial. He still took precautions. He surrounded the gate with cobblestone to protect it. If the portal were destroyed, it would be a problem. An arrow whistled from behind. Li Wei raised his sword and blocked it. A skeleton archer had spawned in the Soul Sand Valley biome. Its shots were clumsy, slow, and predictable. After 2 slashes, it was dead. Compared to the fierce battles on the central continent, these fights felt like child's play, simple, direct, with little complexity. Nearby, a dark brick bastion towered over a sea of lava. A nether fortress loomed close as well. Li Wei hurried over, building a safe path of cobblestone until he stood on nether brick. Achievement unlocked. Spooky, scary skeletons. He began to loot. Where a Minecraft player went, nothing was left behind. Chests in the bastion yielded 9 diamonds, 23 gold ingots, iron, assorted gold gear, flint and steel, an iron horse armor, and a diamond horse armor. He also collected nether wart and located a blaze spawner, the things in the nether that mattered most for long-term utility. Some people complained about resurrection, some accepted it. Li Wei had already decided he wouldn't rely on resurrection. He was aiming for a 1-life clear. Thanks to Taoist friend Shushan Yu for the 1,500 coin reward. Thanks to Huimia de Xiao for 2 monthly passes. Thanks bookfriend 2906232241030018 for 2 monthly passes. Thanks to bookfriend 20210404451679 for 1 monthly pass. Thanks to Chiguata Kushong for 1 monthly pass. Thanks to Mai Yishuan for 2 monthly passes. Thanks to bookfriend 22205139501833 for 1 monthly pass. Thanks to Peng Zepeng for 2 monthly passes. Thanks to XiaoxinXH for 2 monthly passes. Thanks to Alpha Guaijun for 2 monthly passes. Thanks to bookfriend 28804082051592 for 2 monthly passes. Thanks to bookfriend 13120160568670 for 1 monthly pass. Thanks to MC Fangquai Ren for 1 monthly pass. Thank you for your support. Chapter 38, Hell Trek. Netherwort was essential for alchemy, and blazes were both consumables and producers of alchemical ingredients. Clang. A sword strike rang against a blaze. Whatever their material, they were certainly tough. Boom, boom, boom. Several blazes launched fireballs and besieged Li Wei, but their attacks were useless. Li Wei simply raised his shield. They couldn't even dent his defense. Achievement unlocked. Dancing with fire. Blaze rod obtained. Creak. A few wither skeletons circled up from behind, attempting a sneak attack, but they couldn't land a blow. With precise distance control, Li Wei annihilated them with just 3 sword swings. Sweeping Edge lived up to its name. When Li Wei struck, the main target took heavy damage and the extra impact shredded nearby skeletons as well. It seemed stronger than it did in-game. After farming materials at the blaze spawner for a while and finding nothing else to loot, Li Wei left the bastion temporarily and dug up some soul sand and glowstone. On his way back, he managed to kill a magma cube and collect some magma cream, good for treating burns. He stepped through the Hellgate. Phew. Back in the Central Plains, Li Wei let out a relieved breath. The nether was unbearably hot and full of sulfur. The air at home felt fresh by comparison. Under the farm, he cleared a sizable area and planted netherwort. Achievement unlocked, local brewery. With the blaze rod in hand, the first priority was making an alchemy table and brewing potions. The enchanting table, alchemy table, and Hellgate had all been planned together. Li Wei even built a hall around them. It was starting to look like a wizard's dwelling. No one could deny it now. Why not just build a wizard tower, he thought to himself. He brewed a potion of swiftness, enhanced it with glowstone, then added gunpowder to turn it into a splash potion. Tossing it at the horse stable, the bottle shattered, and he quickly fed 2 golden carrots to his 2 fastest horses. Soon he had a remarkably fast pony. He repeated the process twice more. Finally, speed, 20 mies per second. A ceiling-level excellent horse was born. After building a separate trough for that best mount, Li Wei returned to the alchemy table and brewed as many potions as he could. Strength, swiftness, night vision, water breathing, fire resistance. It was a pity the gas tier he had found earlier had fallen into the lava pool. Otherwise, he could have brewed regeneration. He picked up a potion of fire resistance, and his thoughts drifted to Moria. Didn't expect this, Balrog. Your fire magic is useless against me now, he mused. Still, even without fire, the Balrog's mass mattered. A charging enormous creature could topple buildings. Not even Smaug seemed like an easy fight yet. He looked down at his elven steel armor and admitted he was still too weak. Stronger. He had to be stronger. Li Wei checked the 12 diamonds in his backpack, glanced at the Hellgate, and decided the nether still had value. Bastion remnants could drop netherite alloy and random diamond gear. He packed fire resistance potions, golden apples, lembas, and other medical and food supplies, then stepped back through the Hellgate. This way, then, he said. Finding bastion remnants wasn't easy, especially in reality. Li Wei picked a direction and stubbornly explored, killing skeletons, paving stone roads, crossing bizarre forests, eating roasted hoglin, and swimming across lava lakes with potions. After several days of exploration, on a day that was neither day nor night, he finally saw a dark structure up ahead. Inside wandered pig-headed, human-bodied creatures. Some carried crossbows, others wielded golden swords and golden axes, and a few wore armor. Unlike the zombie pigmen he'd encountered, these piglins seemed more rational, with a sharp gleam in their eyes. Li Wei pulled on the golden boots he had brought and approached the bastion. Achievement unlocked, glorious years. A few crossbow-bearing piglins passed by, sniffed at the unfamiliar visitor, then chose to ignore him. Li Wei sighed with relief. He still had a healthy respect for piglins. His first encounter had gone badly. He'd been ganged up on. They dealt high damage, and the brutes with their axes ignored shields. One wrong move could be fatal. Not having to fight now was a blessing. But he knew that if he wanted the treasures inside, combat was inevitable. Opening any chest would turn all nearby piglins hostile, so he needed a plan to handle them before that happened. Li Wei pulled out cobblestone and painstakingly built his way closer to the bastion. Golden armor fooled ordinary piglins, but it meant nothing to brutes. He avoided the 50 health brutes as much as possible. If they had any more health, they could have gone up against ogres. Still, brute strength couldn't match his cunning. A piglin brute carrying a golden axe patrolled a narrow corridor. When he reached a dead end and turned, he heard a tapping behind him. In the time it took to look back, a stone wall had sprung up, sealing the passage. He was trapped. Dumbfounded, the brute could only grunt behind the makeshift barrier. Similar scenes repeated throughout the bastion. Brutes and commoners alike found themselves inexplicably walled in. One moment of inattention, and they were boxed in. A slightly smarter piglin, watching this strange construction, suddenly remembered an old tale about an ancient builder, but it was too late. Li Wei swept through the bastion and looted it top to bottom. He was lucky. He found a pair of diamond pants, a diamond pickaxe, a piece of netherite alloy, and an alloy smithing template. He also dug up dozens of gold ingots from hidden spots and filled a backpack with various chest loot, golden carrots, crossbows, and crying obsidian, forcing him to leave some items behind. The first bastion paid off handsomely. Using the crying obsidian he'd collected, Li Wei crafted a respawn anchor. It could only be placed in the nether and allowed the bound player to respawn up to 4 times, only in the nether. Now, if he died there, he could come back. He placed the respawn anchor near the Hellgate and charged it with glowstone, but he didn't go home. 1 alloy wasn't enough. He trekked the nether for a month. On this day, he found another bastion and used the same method, walling off piglins and looting every chest. Inside, a netherite alloy fragment lay waiting. Finally, it's complete. Li Wei set up a crafting table, placed 4 gold ingots and 4 netherite alloy fragments into it, and crafted the 4th netherite ingot. Thanks to Feng Yun for 2 monthly votes. Thanks to God Doesn't Like Onions for 1 monthly vote. Thanks to Rebirth of I Am Peepee Shrimp for 1 monthly vote. Thanks to Reader 290123482746 for 2 monthly votes. Thanks to DSDS for 1 monthly vote. Thanks to Joe Jan for 1 monthly vote. Thanks to Reader 12303-183575543 for 2 monthly votes. Thanks to Update Faster You for 1 monthly vote. Thanks to Reader 221112116541246 for 2 monthly votes. Thanks to Southern Menge for 1 monthly vote. Thanks to Reader 1012321632021 for 2 monthly votes. Thanks to Reader 22209072233411743 for 2 monthly votes. Thanks to I Like to Sneak Read Books for 2 monthly votes. Thanks to I Am Not a Big Loser for 1 monthly vote. Thanks to Reader 22209231203515545 for 1 monthly vote. Thanks to Crabbro Sizzling for 1 monthly vote. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 39, Unexpected Visitors. Heaven knew how many bastion remnants Li Wei had searched through to get those 4 netherite alloy ingots. He could have mined for fragments himself, but the odds of finding enough were low, and mining was slower than hunting bastions. More importantly, even if he mined the fragments, he still wouldn't have enough diamonds for armor, so he needed a way to get diamonds. Bastion chests solved that problem. In the middle of each bastion he raided, there was always a chest or 2 with diamond gear, sometimes armor, sometimes weapons or tools. To carry everything valuable he found, Li Wei discarded unnecessary food, potions, and even a stack of iron blocks. Iron was plentiful in ore veins. He couldn't possibly use it all. All his hard work had paid off. When his nether run was finally done, Li Wei retraced his steps back to the portal. Pioneering had been difficult. Rugged terrain, roads across lava lakes, and the constant threat of spawned monsters. Returning was easier, just sprinting along the path he'd carved. On the way, he even had time to kill a few ghasts and cut down a couple of endermen in the warped forest. He rolled the cool, smooth ender pearls between his fingers and thought how much they might fetch, but also how easily they'd startle someone if one slipped from a hand. It's time to go home. The overworld's sunlight and fresh air felt like a blessing. The light was so bright, Li Wei almost couldn't open his eyes. Coming from the nether's crimson gloom, the yellow-tinged green grass and dazzling sun were a shock. Autumn has come, he sighed, enjoying the cool breeze. More than half a year had passed since he'd arrived in this world. It seemed he was always either adventuring or preparing to. He took a deep breath, let the sulfur smell leave his nostrils, stretched and savored the peace. He went to the warehouse to tidy his pack, and then to the enchanting table. Fortunately, his trips to the bastions had yielded a complete set of diamond gear, some pieces with decent enchantments. After so much nether combat, he had reached level 42. He poured his experience into enchanted books, constantly refreshing to get the attributes he wanted. When his XP ran low, he went fishing. When he had enough, he returned to the table. He spent another week doing that, filling chests with miscellaneous items, enchanted books, bows, fishing rods, some excellent, some junk. Thanks to luck of the C3, he combined the trash enchanted gear on an anvil and even made a fully enchanted bow with Infinity, Power Vive, Infinity, Unbreaking 3, Punch 2, and Flame. Its base stats were inferior to the orc bow, but the enchantments made it serviceable until he could enchant the orc bow properly. He also maxed out his fishing rod, using fished-up enchanted books to give it lure 3 and mending. Those were nice gains, but the most important thing was that his diamond set's attributes were now fully upgraded. At the smithing table, he took his diamond armor and the netherite alloy. Achievement unlocked, covered in scraps. A set of exquisite jet-black armor appeared on him, faintly glowing, hard, powerful, and heavy-looking, yet it did not restrict his movement. 4 pieces of netherite alloy armor gave a total of 4 points of knockback resistance. It was a full set of Protection 4 netherite alloy armor, and wearing it made Li Wei feel invincible. He felt confident enough to attempt tougher challenges. There was one more thing. He pulled out the elven ancient sword and applied every necessary enchantment: sharpness Vi, unbreaking 3, sweeping edge 3, looting 3, mending, and fire aspect 2. After some thought, he deliberately left out knockback. Sending an enemy flying with one swing only to have to chase it down would be annoying and poor for combat flow. With his equipment ready, Li Wei kept up his routine: mining, harvesting crops, tending animals, brewing potions, smelting metals, quietly accumulating resources. Too bad there's still no redstone-like material, neither in the overworld nor in the nether, he muttered. Without redstone, automation was impossible, and many technologies couldn't be tested. He didn't know how long he'd keep hoarding resources, but he worked day and night, doing what only he could do. The stores in the castle grew rapidly. One fine morning, Li Wei leaned against the castle wall, taking in the view, when he noticed a figure standing at the gate. An old man in a gray robe, wearing a pointed hat and leaning on a wooden staff, had propped himself up on the grass and was smoking pipeweed. He stared at the vast castle with a puzzled expression. Brows knotted. He looked like someone questioning the very nature of reality. "Either I've lost my memory or this world has gone wrong," the old man murmured. Li Wei pulled the lever. With a clang, the 2 iron doors swung open, startling the visitor. "Oh, good day, stranger," the old man said politely despite his surprise. "Hello, can I help you?" Li Wei asked, watching him closely. The moment he saw the weathered but kindly face and the deep, wise eyes under thick, white eyebrows, Li Wei knew who it was. It couldn't be anyone else, the gray wizard, Gandalf. "Hello, young man. I'm a bit perplexed. I don't recall ever seeing such a huge castle on this plane. Though I look old, my memory is usually sharp," Gandalf said, taking another puff of his pipe to steady himself. "I passed this way less than a year ago. There was nothing here then. Absolutely nothing." "You're right. There was nothing here a year ago," Li Wei replied. "I found the location and built the castle." "You built all of this? By yourself? In less than a year?" Gandalf's frown deepened, and he looked as if he sensed something amiss. The old wizard studied Li Wei closely, as if trying to read something written on his face. "I don't recall any newcomers arriving," he said slowly. "Still, there's something about your aura. It's oddly familiar." "My name is Gandalf," the wizard added, as if reminding himself and Li Wei both. "Gandalf the Grey, that's what people call me." The youth introduced himself in turn. "Li Wei, an adventurer." "You look more like an architect or a lord," Gandalf observed. "Lord is a bit grand," Li Wei said with a wry smile. "I do a little architecture on the side." Li Wei watched the wizard carefully. Gandalf's body was surprisingly robust. The little status display showed 30 HP, but Li Wei suspected that reading might be locked or capped. In any case, this Gandalf felt ancient and unmistakably powerful. "You shouldn't stand on the threshold," Li Wei said with a small laugh. "Come in and have a look around." "Delighted," Gandalf replied, and followed him through the iron gate. Gandalf's eyes swept over the homestead. Fenced pens, a large horse pasture with troughs, fields of mature crops. It was autumn, harvest season, and the crops looked healthy and promising. The wizard nodded appreciatively, then glanced beyond the basics. A blacksmith's forge drew his attention. Its style nagged at a memory in his mind. On the other side of the yard sat an enchanting table, runes drifting constantly from the surrounding bookshelves toward its surface. That sight stirred Gandalf's curiosity. "There is magic here," he murmured. At that moment, the book on the enchanting table chose to open. Its pages turned of their own accord and swept toward Gandalf, which genuinely startled the old man. "It is the sort of thing used to imbue weapons," Li Wei said simply. Gandalf peered at the staff the young man carried. It looked plain enough, solid wood, and the display listed attack +5. He frowned. Your staff doesn't seem very sturdy. Would you allow me to enchant it? Enchant? Add magic? Li Wei asked. If it can be done, please. Gandalf found himself inexplicably fond of this young man. The sensation was like a memory slipping up from a very long ago past, older than his life in Middle-earth. He handed the staff to Li Wei and watched, eyes searching, as if reading a book. Li Wei's interface ran another quick check of Gandalf. No hostility detected. The wizard's appraisal confirmed what he'd suspected from the start. This man was no enemy of the Free Peoples. He had ties with elves and rangers, and got along with dwarves. Gandalf made a mental note to ask around the neighboring hamlets. A structure this large ought to have generated rumors. While Gandalf pondered, Li Wei went to work. He set the staff on the enchanting table and placed his lapis lazuli beside it. The staff floated. The lapis dissolved into glowing motes that streamed into the wood. Li Wei's screen ticked off details: durability 3, sharpness 4. He took an enchantment book labeled Sharpness 4 from a nearby chest and stacked the enchantments, upgrading the staff to Sharpness Vi. The once simple stick now shimmered faintly. Its attack power had climbed to 8. Li Wei handed it back. Gandalf felt the change immediately. He swung the staff experimentally twice. Its weight and balance were transformed. It's harder, keener, he said, a rare smile cracking his weathered face. It would do well in a fight. Glad it helps, Li Wei replied. Gandalf hesitated over what to call the young man. He held so many titles, but in the end settled on the simplest form. Thank you, Li Wei. Their tour continued. There wasn't an enormous amount inside the territory yet. Many areas remained undeveloped, but each station they passed sparked memories and stories in Gandalf. At the alchemy station, he noted, I once knew a fellow in the woods who brewed odd remedies. He used them mostly to aid animals nearby. At the Netherwort patch, Gandalf grew solemn. I have seen this kind of sand in the dead marshes to the east, places full of bones and sorrow. There, spirits linger and mislead the unwary. Travelers can be lost to illusions and drown among the dead. Li Wei answered lightly in his head. The soul sand here, when mixed with water, didn't pull people under. It could make one float up. They traded a wry look. Pointing at the Netherwort, Gandalf added bluntly, Some of your raw materials, they smell of death. It's not the sort of thing I usually tend to. It's useful. No one's harmed. Gandalf moved on, calm but watchful. He accepted a certain darkness in the world if it did not spread harm. That was the old wizard's way. Cautious, measured, ready to intervene when the balance tilted. When they reached the nether portal, however, Gandalf stopped as if his feet had been nailed to the ground. He widened his eyes and seemed unable to move. Without thinking, he let his pipe drop to his lips and lit it, the habit of a traveler trying to steady himself. This, he breathed, and the single word hung in the air as they both stared at the shimmering gateway.